Chapter 91. Why should I do anything? Wu Zhu rarely asked rhetorical questions like this. Ever since Fan Xian left Danzhou and came to the capital, he seemed to have become even more mysterious than he had been in Danzhou. He had never seen Fan Xian face to face. Fan Xian's heart sank. Even if Wu Zhu had watched him grow up, Fan Xian had no reason to ask anything of him. In this world, only he owed Uncle Wu Zhu. Wu Zhu saw that Fan Xian didn't say anything. He tilted his body slightly and said lightly, "I've said it before. I've taught you for many years, and Fei Jia has taught you as well. If you still can't deal with these small matters, then that's your problem, not ours." Afterwards, I found out that the big man was an 8th-level master. Uncle, you said before that I was actually a 7th-level master and had the power of a 3rd-level master. I shouldn't have been a match for that big man. Fan Xian smiled bitterly. You said it was my problem. Did you not care if I was killed by someone else? Did you die? Wu Zhu asked a question with an obvious answer. It was a rare second rhetorical question. Fan Xian stared at the black cloth on his face and sucked in a breath of cold air. You were by my side the whole time? Yes. Then why didn't you do anything? Fan Xian lowered his voice and yelled angrily. Those 3 guards are dead. Teng Zijing is also injured. I've never cared about the life or death of anyone else other than you. Wu Zhu's words were cold and heartless. The people around you were gathered together because of you. If you want to control their lives, then you must protect them. So the life or death of those guards is your responsibility, not mine. Fan Xian once again sank into silence. He knew that Uncle Wu Zhu was right. I can't help you too much, Wu Zhu said coldly. Wu Zhu said coldly, on the cliff in Danzhou, I once said that if I were by your side in the capital, I would bring you trouble. Trouble that you would never want to face. Fan Xian smiled bitterly as he recalled that conversation when he was 12 years old. At the time, he had said cheekily, I will protect you. But in the end, it could only have been a joke. So remember, in the capital, I will never stand by your side under the sun, unless you are about to die, or, you are already dead. Wu Zhu continued to speak expressionlessly. Fan Xian didn't understand what a powerful warrior like Uncle Wu Zhu was afraid of, but he heard the decisiveness in these words. There was no room for negotiation, so he nodded his head sadly. Someone's coming, Wu Zhu said quickly, then disappeared into the darkness once more. The visitor was a guest, but one that Fan Xian did not want to see. Crown Prince Jing, Li Hongqing, walked in with a gloomy face. He sat down on the edge of the bed and growled in a low voice, Do you know what happened today? The envoy from Northern Qi refused to admit it, and the agitated imperial students almost destroyed the office of the Grand Herald. The office of the Grand Herald was the diplomatic organization of the Kingdom of Qing. It was responsible for the exchange of money and documents with Northern Qi, various small kingdoms, and Dongyi, as well as other related matters. Hearing that the office of the Grand Herald had almost been destroyed, Fan Xian smiled bitterly. These young people are really hot-blooded. But, of course, Northern Qi won't admit it. If the people of the Kingdom of Qing found out that an enemy country could send assassins to assassinate people in the capital, I'm afraid there would be endless trouble between the 2 countries. Li Hongqing smiled bitterly. Trouble has already begun. His Majesty has already issued an edict. The envoy from Northern Qi in Yanjing has been driven out of the city, even their luggage. Fan Xian laughed mockingly. Dealing with outsiders is quite fast. Hearing the other meaning in his words, Li Hongqing frowned. I've been coming to see you for the past few days. You haven't recovered from your injuries, so there are some things I can't say. Fan Xian sighed. I don't know which life I've owed you. I treated you to a meal, and then someone tried to assassinate me. After I came to the capital, I met you. You're the crown prince, and you've always been straightforward. Why are you so hesitant today? Li Hongqing blamed himself. This is my fault. No one would have thought that the drunken immortal tavern was a spy from northern Qi. He thought for a moment. Today, I'm here to express my apologies on behalf of the second prince. He was going to visit you personally, but as you know, the situation in the capital has been rather muddled because of the assassination attempt on you. So, it's not convenient for him to come rashly. He smiled bitterly. You should know that many people are still speculating that the second prince and I were the masterminds behind your assassination, and that we were only trying to frame the crown prince. Fan Xian looked at him with a faint smile. Li Hongqing laughed. You're looking at me so mysteriously. Am I supposed to admit that I was the mastermind? Fan Xian also smiled. He believed that this matter was not done by the second prince, because losing the support of the Fan Manor was a loss that the second prince, who already had no strong support in court, could not afford to lose. At least, the benefits he would gain from framing the crown prince were far, far greater. With great difficulty, Fan Xian sat up on the bed. The servant girl helped him pour a bowl of water to drink. Seeing the figure at the door, he couldn't help but curse in his heart. He was clearly injured so badly, yet he kept receiving visitors. How could this be considered healing? This was clearly suffering. This time, however, the visitor was a stranger. He introduced himself as an official of the First Bureau of the Overwatch Council. He was currently investigating the assassination case on Nyolan Street. Because this case involved officials of the court, and because there were rumors of some unclear background, all the files had been handed over to the Overwatch Council. How should I address you? A servant had already poured a cup of tea for the Overwatch Council official. Fan Xian squinted at him. This was the first time he had seen an official of the Overwatch Council anywhere other than the time he had bravely charged into the council. The officials of the Overwatch Council all seemed to have a deathly aura about them. This feeling made Fan Xian think of that accursed teacher Fei Jia again. I am Mu Tai. The official's lips were as thin as iron, and his face was dark. Without any expression, he replied, a few days ago, you were seriously injured, so there are some questions that I have yet to ask. Today, I have come to ask. Please cooperate. Fan Xian frowned. It seemed that this official didn't know about the secret relationship between Fan Manor and the Overwatch Council, which was why he spoke like this. I am tired. Let's talk another day. Mu Tai didn't seem to expect Fan Xian to refuse to answer his questions, and his expression turned ugly. Fan Xian waved his hand and asked curiously, the Council and the Ministry of Justice have already submitted the report. What else is there to ask? There are some things that are not clear. The official, Mu Tai, stared at Fan Xian's eyes. Fan Xian's heart jumped. He knew that the Overwatch Council was also suspicious of the archers, but what use was there in asking him? The only person he had offended in the capital was Guo Baoquan, the son of a mere civil official. He would not dare to collude with Northern Qi. As for the Crown Prince, that was something that even Fan Xian could not say. Fan Xian pulled out the token that Fei Jia had given him from under his pillow and tossed it over. We're all on the same side. If you have anything to say, just say it. Mu Tai's tea was untouched. He took the token and looked at it. His expression changed, and he rose from his seat. He walked over to Fan Xian and knelt on one knee. He cupped his fists and bowed. Greetings, sir. Seeing Master Mu kneeling in front of him, Fan Xian was shocked. He hadn't expected the token to be so useful. He had no idea that the token Fei Jia had given him was a commissioner's token, an existence that was independent of the 8 bureaus of the Overwatch Council. Aside from Director Chen Zhang's direct orders, the Overwatch Council had the same rank as the heads of the 8 bureaus. So when Mu Tai saw the token, he couldn't help but be shocked. Fan Xian gestured for him to stand up. He frowned. When will Master Fei return to the capital? This was the question he was most concerned about. Although Wan Er's health was improving, the root of her illness could not be removed. He didn't know how long she would have to endure it. Secondly, the situation in the capital was complicated. Uncle Wu Zhu was still a ghost, and his father was still polite. Deep in his heart, Fan Xian trusted Fei Jie, but he wasn't in the capital. Hearing this handsome young man ask about Sir Fei, Mu Tai was certain that he was a powerful figure in the Overwatch Council. A secret service organization like the Overwatch Council always liked to develop spies in the various manors and departments of the capital. It was clear that this young master of Fan Manor was one of them, and he was of a particularly high rank. Mu Tai replied respectfully, "It should be a few more days." "Have you found anything yet?" Fan Xian stared at him. Mu Tai replied in a low voice, "The council received the news too late, so the bodies of the archers were all cremated. In the end, they traced it to the City Patrol Division, and the trail was cut off." The City Patrol Division? Who cares about that? Jiao Ziheng. Mu Tai raised his head and looked at Fan Xian, curious that he didn't know Jiao Ziheng's identity. He replied, "He shouldn't be one of the Crown Prince's men." As soon as he saw the waste token, which couldn't be forged, he determined Fan Xian's identity, so he spoke without hesitation. This was the style of the Overwatch Council. All the strict hierarchy only worked within the council. "You're in charge of this case?" Fan Xian looked at him curiously. "What rank?" "I'm a 7th rank official," Mu Tai replied with a smile. "Just an errand boy. When can Si Lily enter the capital?" Fan Xian suddenly thought of his only witness, and frowned. Those people ran fast. Even if they were stopped now, it would take a few days before they could return to the capital. Mu Tai looked at him, thinking that he had guessed why someone would collude with Northern Qi to assassinate this handsome young man. It seemed that this young man was a candidate for the council's training. Thinking of this, Mu Tai's heart warmed, as if he had found an opportunity to make a meteoric rise. He gathered his courage and asked, "Sir, although I don't know exactly what you're doing in the capital, you've only just arrived. If there's anything you need me to do, please let me know." Fan Xian asked curiously, "Then what about your current situation?" Mu Tai smiled. "I can transfer it to you immediately. The council has always been divided by rank. Given your status, it would be easy for you to transfer me here." Fan Xian immediately guessed what Mu Tai was thinking. He smiled bitterly. "Forget it. I don't even know what to do. If you follow me and lose your life for no reason, what good would that do you?" His heart suddenly darkened as he thought of the 3 bodyguards who had died on Nyolan Street a few days ago. These bodyguards had been following him ever since he entered the capital, but before he could even remember their names, they were already dead. He asked a maid to open the window, and the light and cool breeze from outside rushed into the gloomy room. Fan Xian took a deep breath, roused himself, and decided to do something. He asked the warm-hearted Overwatch Council official, "Is there a man named Wang Qinian in the council?" Chapter 92. Wang Qinian looked at the sesame seed cake stall in front of him and smelled the spicy aroma. His nose turned sour, and he almost cried. Recently, his life had not been good. He had been removed from the council. Not only had he lost his salary and pension, but more importantly, no matter which yamen it was, once they saw his record in the Overwatch Council, they would politely ask him to leave. And ordinary shops would not hire him, and he did not know how to use an abacus. He only knew how to use torture tools, and he did not know how to do business. He only knew how to investigate cases. When he had first entered the Overwatch Council, he had been high-spirited and had cracked cases. All of the officials under him who had committed crimes had to confess their crimes. Who would have thought that one day he would be like a stray dog? Now he was old, and he had a wife and children to support. Sigh, he left in a daze, feeling the few pieces of silver at his waist. He wondered who he had offended to end up like this. In fact, he also knew why he had been removed from the list. The cause was simple. He had heard that the master of 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 the Temple of Qing. The palace was furious, and so they began to investigate. The Overwatch Council also began to help. Originally, this matter did not have much to do with him. But no one could have imagined that after searching along the street, the Ministry of Internal Affairs would find out that the young man had gone to the Overwatch Council before entering the Temple of Qing. This was a big deal. Sir Chen was not in the capital, and the Overwatch Council was like a fatherless child. The high-ranking officials of the Overwatch Council thought that if the palace thought that the young man had something to do with the council, how could they explain it? At the end of the investigation, they found Wang Qinian. Because after the young man entered the Overwatch Council, many officials testified that the young man had pulled Wang Qinian and said a lot. Wang Qinian accepted the investigation in confusion. He told them all about his conversation with the young man, but did not reveal the fact that the young man was Sir Fei's student. The Internal Affairs Bureau did not find any other problems with Wang Qinian, so they could only let it go. But they still found a random reason to kick him out of the Overwatch Council. It was like finding a scapegoat. Wang Qinian was pitifully chased out, but he still did not reveal the identity of the young man. He faintly knew that this matter was not as simple as it seemed. The young man might lack experience and carelessly reveal his identity, but he could not do so. Although losing his job was scary, offending Sir Fei was even scarier. This was something all the Overwatch Council officials knew very well. When Elder Fei returns, I'll go complain. Wang Qinian put on a long face, his head resting weakly on his towering shoulders as he walked into the distance. Brother Wang. An official from the First Bureau appeared from the corner of the street with a smile on his face and blocked his path. Wang Qinian took a closer look and recognized Mu Tai from the First Bureau. He had heard that Mu Tai was currently working with the investigation team for the Nyolan Street assassination case. Wang Qinian had barely spoken to Wang Qinian before. Why did Mu Tai have the time to look for him? Wang Qinian bowed with a face full of suspicion. Master Mu, what brings you here? Mu Tai's face was plastered with a flattering smile. Congratulations, Brother Wang, he said softly. He had originally thought that he could climb up to Fan Xian's high branch. He did not expect that he would be helping someone else instead. But seeing that Master Fan had entrusted this matter to him, there was always a chance that he could get closer in the future. Mu Tai had always been a dull man who devoted himself to official duties. But as he grew older, he could no longer plan for his future. Seeing Fan Xian's waist token, and connecting it with the words he had accidentally read while working on a certain case, Mu Tai had already decided that Fan Xian was a very thick thigh. That was why he was so respectful to Wang Qinian, who might be Master Fan's trusted aide. But Mu Tai had always been a dull man. Doing this for the first time, the flattering smile on his face was somewhat stiff and unnatural. Wang Qinian's heart trembled. Looking at the stiff smile on Mu Tai's face, he wondered if he was going to be silenced. Wang Qinian sat in a secluded room, his fear still lingering. He looked at the handsome young man in front of him. Even if he turned him to ash, he would still recognize him. This was the young man who had caused him to be kicked out of the Overwatch Council. After seeing the waist token, Wang Qinian knew that he had made the right bet. This young man was clearly not only Master Fei's student, but had an even more frightening identity. Fan Xian had not expected this waist token to have such a powerful effect. He could not help but narrow his eyes as he recalled the time he had spent with Fei Jie. The cripple of the Overwatch Council was the person who had saved his life when he had just been reincarnated. It was clear that the Overwatch Council was taking care of him for his mother's sake. So he had to make good use of this advantage. Do you understand what I said? Fan Xian looked at Wang Qinian with a smile. This official was a little old, and he had a wife and a son at home. He fit Fan Xian's requirements perfectly. Fan Xian had no experience in commanding subordinates, so he had to learn everything along the way. That was why he wanted his first trusted aide to be someone he had met by chance, and someone who was not too ambitious. I understand, Master Fan. Wang Qinian smiled. His fingers unconsciously pressed down on his belt. Aside from a few pieces of silver, there were already a few banknotes. No, it should be Master Fan. I've only just entered the capital, so I don't have any capable subordinates. Master is also not in the capital. Fan Xian thought for a moment. I still have a trusted aide named Ting Zijing, but he is currently injured. I don't think he will recover for a few months. In the future, when he is well, I will arrange for you to meet him. Yes. Wang Qinian did not say anything unnecessary. This was much better than when Fan Xian had first entered the Overwatch Council. Think of a way to find some people. This was the first time Fan Xian had tried to do something like this, so he felt a little unfamiliar. He could only learn step by step. Can people like you and me be transferred from the council? Wang Qinian suddenly felt a little uneasy. Master, I actually just left the council. Fan Xian was shocked. Could it be that things were going so wrong for him? What is the reason? Wang Qinian gathered his courage and told him about the Overwatch Council's internal investigation. He also told him about the Temple of Qing. He purposely hid Fan Xian's identity, to show his foresight and prematurely loyal. Fan Xian frowned and asked, my current position is that of a commissioner. Can the power of a commissioner help you in this matter? Of course. Wang Qinian was overjoyed. He now knew that he was following someone who was destined to be extraordinary in the future. I just need to go through some procedures. Master, you can issue a warrant for me to return to my status as a member of the Overwatch Council, and then I can return to the council in a few days. Very well, then I will take care of these matters immediately. Fan Xian looked at the old man and muttered to himself, wondering what use he would have for such a trusted aide. What is Master Wang's specialty? He asked gently. Tracking and concealment. As soon as Wang Qinian mentioned his specialty, his spirits rose, and he spoke with confidence and assurance. After listening for a long time, Fan Xian realized that he had run into an extraordinary person. Wang Qinian had been a lone thief in the northern part of the kingdom of Qing when he was young. He loved to travel between the dozen or so vassal states between northern Wei and the kingdom of Qing. He would sell the goods he stole from country A to country B, and then sell the goods he stole from country B to country C. Because he never revealed the origin of his stolen goods, and because he was naturally good at hiding his tracks, he had been able to safely conduct his business for several years. Later, the officials of the small vassal states grew angry and joined forces to surround him. He had no way to use his methods, and was forced to enter the kingdom of Qing. Unexpectedly, as soon as he entered the kingdom of Qing, he ran into Director Chen Pingping of the Overwatch Council, who had been planning the northern expedition with the emperor. He surrendered and became an official. Fan Xian looked him in the eye and said quietly, "See, Lily is being escorted back to the capital. Perhaps someone wants to intercept her, or perhaps someone wants to kill her. Whatever it is, don't worry about it. Just keep an eye on those people, and see who they meet in the end." He paused, a little embarrassed. "As you said earlier, you are good at tracking, but your martial arts are poor, so I had to come up with this stupid idea." Wang Qinian smiled. "When I was young, the council wasn't as big as it is now. Zhong Zhui and I were the two best at tracking in the council. Later, he stayed by the director's side, and I became a little lazy, so I switched to a civilian job. But don't worry, master. Although I'm old, keeping an eye on a few people shouldn't be a problem. I have a lawsuit to attend, so I can't leave the capital. Otherwise, I would definitely go and see your skills. Fan Xian laughed. Old Wang, I don't care about anything else. You have to take care of your old life first. That's the most important thing. After this matter was settled, Fan Xian hurried back to Fan Manor. Frowning, he asked his sister to fix his injured shoulder. He mixed some motherwort powder, which stopped the bleeding and regenerated muscle. It had a miraculous effect. He refused to let the doctors touch his wound. On the one hand, he didn't trust their ability to treat poison. On the other hand, Ruoruo's slender and soft fingers were much more comfortable and lovely than the calloused bare paws of a rough man. Entering the study, Fan Xian saw Count Sinan's gray hair. With some difficulty, he bowed and said, "Father, I need some help." Fan Xian looked at him and couldn't help but smile. "Where do you want to keep an eye on?" "The eldest princess's guest house, the prime minister's servants' quarters, the crown prince's frequent brothel, the second prince's favorite polo ground. King Jing's grape trellis." Fan Xian shrugged. "You know I'm not very professional when it comes to these matters, so I need you to help me find some professional people. Then they can make a decision on how to find the person behind the scenes." Fan Xian raised his index finger and shook it. "We don't need professionals." "You're right about that. But we need to make arrangements. A group of professionals, under the direction of an inexperienced person, will not be able to do these things well. Father, please advise me," Fan Xian said sincerely. Fan Xian looked at him, then lowered his head to continue reading. "Actually, the places you mentioned are already being watched. I'm just curious. You haven't been in the capital for long. How do you know about these places?" Fan Xian smiled. He knew that while his father was outwardly urging him to be patient, he had already begun investigating in secret. It's easy to learn things by talking to the servants. Fan Xian didn't raise his head. His eyes were still on the book. "But you have to be prepared. The investigation in the capital won't yield any results." Fan Xian frowned. Fan Xian continued, "It still depends on Sea Lily." He paused. "The two female assassins you killed, they seem to be the disciples of Sigurd of Dongyi. And I heard that Sigurd hasn't shown himself in Dongyi for a long time. You have to be careful." Fan Xian replied with worry, "If a great grandmaster focused on killing someone, who could avoid him?" Fan Xian nodded. "But you probably don't have the qualifications for him to make a move against you. Don't worry. This is just some useful information." 10 days later, outside of Zhangzhou, about 500 miles to the north from the capital, a group of people were heading south against the cold morning wind. They were people from the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. After 1,000 miles of pursuit, they had finally captured Sea Lily before she could escape the Qing kingdom. They were going to take her back to the capital to be interrogated. The group had been heading south for a long time. In a few days, they would return to the capital. The leading Overwatch Council official handed a steamed bun into the prisoner's carriage. "Eat this." Sea Lily's face was haggard. Her long hair was a mess, and there was some dirt on her face. If Fan Xian had seen her now, he would never have guessed that she was the most popular courtesan in the capital who had shared a bed with him for a night. Sea Lily chewed on the hard steamed bun. She suddenly raised her face and gritted her teeth. "Even if you take me back to the capital, I won't tell you anything." The official looked at her, his eyes full of mockery. "You think we take you back to the capital because we want to find out something from you? I really don't understand. Do my colleagues in Northern Qi have nothing better to do? Why would they let an idiot like you stay in the capital?" Sea Lily was indeed a spy from Northern Qi, but she usually met people in the guise of a courtesan. What kind of man would coldly call her an idiot? With a trembling voice, she said, "Of course I know what you don't want to know from my mouth, because if I tell you, I'm afraid the politics of the Qing kingdom will be in chaos for a while." The official said mockingly, "Actually, you had the best choice from the beginning. On the day of the assassination, you should have surrendered, instead of running away. That way, you could accuse any official of colluding with Northern Qi, and it would have been enough to achieve Northern Qi's goal. But you ran away, which means that you value your life more than this mission." Xi Lili lowered her head, admitting this fact. Her fingers squeezed the hard steamed bun hard, leaving deep marks on it. Chapter 93. The official continued coldly, "We always knew that Drunken Immortal Tavern was your secret plot, but it was useless, so we just kept an eye on it. Who would have thought that you would be so daring as to do such a thing and then try to escape? How could there be such a simple thing in this world?" After Xi Lili and her party were captured on the border, she learned that their every move had been secretly observed by the Overwatch Council. She couldn't help but feel a chill in her heart. She was terrified of the Qing Emperor's secret agency. Seeing that the official was about to ride away, Xi Lili suddenly screamed, "You'd better kill me now. Otherwise, in a moment, that person in the court will come and save me." The official frowned and looked at her. He suddenly said, "It should be that person who will send someone to kill you." Just as he finished speaking, on the hillside in front of the prisoner carriage, there appeared, as everyone expected, people blocking their way. But no one had expected that the people blocking their way would be the horse gang, which bordered the northern border of the Qing kingdom and the small kingdoms. Although there were only a few dozen of them, they were angry and brandishing their knives. Against the Overwatch Council, which only had a dozen people, anyone with eyes could tell who would win this encounter. Although there were not many horse bandits, they dared to appear in a place only 500 li from Jingdo. Furthermore, the provincial soldiers guarding Jingdo did not know about it. If the people of the world knew, it would certainly cause an uproar in the court. Xi Lili's face had become deathly pale. Although she wasn't a smart person, she knew that if she fell into those people's hands, she would certainly be silenced. The official didn't seem to have imagined that the court official would have connections with the horse gang on the border. His expression seemed a little nervous. He approached the prisoner carriage and said, "Xi Lili, it seems that you and I will both die here. At a time like this, why don't you tell me which court official is colluding with Northern Qi? If a few of my subordinates manage to escape, they can report this to the court and avenge us." Xi Lili's long eyelashes drooped. Thinking that she was about to die here, she wanted to cry. She was about to speak when she suddenly thought of something strange. She raised her head and said coldly, "Sir, you're trying to scare me again." The official didn't seem to expect Xi Lili to see through his trick. He frowned imperceptibly. Xi Lili said sorrowfully, "Sir, you should know what kind of business I do. I've learned to read people's expressions since I was young." Sir's voice trembled a little, but your grip on the cart was steady and relaxed. Clearly, you weren't worried. It seems like this ambush is something that you have long anticipated. Not bad. Only now did the official realize that this beautiful woman had the potential to be a spy. He smiled and said, "If we can't even guess something like this, then the Overwatch Council wouldn't be the Overwatch Council." While the two of them were talking, dozens of horses had already rushed down from the small slope. A silent murderous aura soared into the sky. This kind of formation was obviously not something that the horse gang should have. Around the prison carriage, the people of the Overwatch Council had already set up a semicircle of defense. However, there were too few people, so it looked sparse and pitiful. However, for some reason, in the face of the ferocious cavalry, these people's faces were filled with solemnity, as if they had already disregarded life and death. "Hold!" The leading official clenched his right fist and stared coldly at the approaching riders. His yell was in a neutral tone. If Fan Xian had been listening, he would have thought of the English word, hold, he often heard in movies in his previous life. The cavalry disguised as the horse gang came closer and closer. The leading official suddenly took a step back, straightened his right arm, and roared, "Ready!" At this moment, the Overwatch Council soldiers, who had been in a semicircular defensive formation, suddenly changed their formation. They formed a sharp and sudden stance. Even more terrifying was that they had taken out hard crossbows from somewhere. Raising them level, they aimed at the riders in front of them. The distance between the two sides was too close. The leader of the cavalry had a strange look in his eyes. He pulled on the reins and sped up, making a turn and going around the front of the cavalry. To be able to suddenly accelerate and make a turn at such a high speed showed that his horsemanship was superb. Fire! As the leader of the cavalry pulled on the reins of his horse, the leading official of the Overwatch Council quietly gave the order. A volley of crossbow bolts flew out. Although they were not concentrated, the power of the springs made the bolts fly abnormally fast. They hissed in the air, sounding very frightening. There were a number of muffled grunts. The riders at the front were hit by the crossbow bolts and fell heavily to the ground. The riders at the back were ready to charge forward, but they did not expect the Overwatch Council to use repeating crossbows. This kind of repeating crossbow was a weapon that had only appeared in the world 20 years ago. The quiver could hold 8 crossbow bolts, and it was the most terrifying enemy of light cavalry. Seeing this formation and seeing the crossbow bolts coming at them, the cavalry suddenly panicked. They split into 2 groups and went around the prisoner carriage, preparing to take them in from the sides. If they had charged directly, perhaps the effect would have been better. But there were no ifs in this world. As they went around, a few more riders fell to the ground. Even more frightening, they found that there was an ambush behind the prisoner carriage. Seeing the attire of the ambushers, the group of riders disguised as mounted bandits suddenly lost their will to fight. They no longer cared about killing the women in the prisoner carriage, and they scattered in all directions. Lying in ambush at the back was a group of riders dressed in black armor. It was the same group that Fan Xian saw when he opened his eyes in this world. When Director Chen Pingping of the Overwatch Council left the capital to deal with council affairs, His Majesty had specially approved the personal cavalry of His Majesty, the Black Knights. The Black Knights silently charged forward, like a pack of wolves tearing into a flock of sheep. They surrounded the dozens of riders disguised as bandits, and quickly killed them all. Keep them alive! Keep them alive! Fei Jie, who was sitting on the side of the carriage behind the Black Knights, saw this scene and anxiously cried out. Don't kill them all. The curtain at the side of the carriage was lifted by a skinny hand. The old man in the carriage looked around and said coldly, Fei Jie, you're really confused because of your concern. I'm afraid these little bastards don't even know who their master is. Just leave the leader alive. Fei Jie cursed. Master Fan took advantage of our absence to get little Fan Xian into the capital. Something almost happened. How can I not be worried? The old man snorted and smoothed out the wool blanket on his knees. I was visiting my hometown, he lectured. You wanted to sneak out of the capital. Who can you blame? 10 years later, Fei Jie still looked the same. His hair was white, and his eyes were brown. He frowned. Who knows what Master Fan is up to? Master, when you return to the capital, you should have a chat with Count Sinan. This old man was Chen Pingping, who controlled the dark forces of the world. He smiled and looked at the confused cavalry leader in the distance. Of course I understand what Fan Jian is thinking, he said lightly. But what he is thinking is simply nonsense. If you want these things, you might as well not have them. He repeated. Might as well not have them. Just as the two of them were talking, the leader of the riders had long fled into the distance. He quickly became a small black dot in the distance. It was clear that he had fallen into the Overwatch Council's ambush. However, even in death, he did not understand why Chen Pingping, who was visiting his family in his hometown, would appear outside Cangzhou in the north of the Qing kingdom. When he saw the Black Knights, he knew he had lost. Facing the sinister and ruthless Director Chen, even his true master could only maintain his composure, let alone him. He had taken the initiative to escape, so he was farther away from the Black Knights. The Black Knights seemed to be tired after a long and arduous journey. After chasing for 2 li, they saw that the distance between them was getting farther and farther, and could only return to camp. "Has Zhong Zhui gone?" Chen Pingping quietly asked one of his personal attendants. The attendant bowed and responded. At that moment, a grey rider came galloping out of the forest in the distance, quietly following the fleeing leader. "That is not Zhong Zhui." Fei Jie frowned. Chen Pingping stared at the grey shadow, and after a long time, he suddenly laughed. "Since he let us see him, he must be one of us, to be able to maintain the same level as Zhong Zhui. I remember there was such a person in the council many years ago." "Wang Qinian?" "Yes." Chen Pingping smiled. "It seems that the young man we were worried about has finally learned something." After sending Wang Qinian out of the capital, Fan Xian could not show his face in public due to his injury, so he went to less of the planned bookstore and lived a life of seclusion. But now, he had long become famous in the capital, especially those 2 poems that were completely inconsistent with his experience. They made him the center of controversy. Those who supported him saw him as a genius in the poetry world, while those who opposed him saw him as a representative figure who wrote new poems to express his sorrow, but no one knew that even these 7 words had been brought to this world by Fan Xian. There were also rumors of plagiarism in the dark, but 10,000 miles of sorrowful autumn is always a guest was too dazzling, and no one dared to stand out and say that they had written it, so this rumor had not been brought to light. But Fan Xian knew that such a day would come. Because Guo Baoquan's father was the minister of the Board of Rights, and the Guo family was associated with the literary world, Fan Xian had never been afraid of using the worst of intentions to deduce so-called scholars. Because of the coexistence of controversy and reputation, there were often scholars who participated in the poetry meetings at King Jing's manor who would take the initiative to come to Fan Manor, in the name of visiting the young master who had survived a disaster. In reality, they were secretly handing over their poems, hoping to get a word or 2 from Fan Xian. Fan Xian always patiently received them, but he was very stingy with his evaluation of their poems. After all, he had long been prepared to leave the literary world and go into business like Zhang Xianliang. Moreover, he did not think he had the qualifications. He was only 16 years old, and was only relying on the wisdom of a sage from his previous life. Was he going to take in some poets? That was too absurd. Compared to his fame as a poet, what really made him famous in the capital and received the praise of most people was the assassination on Niulan Street. Some of the details of the case that could be known to the common people gradually spread from the Overwatch Council. As the victim, Fan Xian, in such a dangerous situation, not only was he able to preserve his own life, but he also fought back bravely, beheading the Northern Qi assassin with his bare hands. Furthermore, the assassin was an 8th-level master. This fact made Fan Xian rise to a new level in the eyes of the scholars in the capital. No one said that he was an underground fighter for the Fan family anymore. Everyone was talking about the young master of the Fan family, who was skilled in both literature and martial arts, and who had bravely killed the Northern Qi assassin. To be able to compose a poem in 7 steps, and to be able to kill in 7 steps, that is Master Fan. Chapter 94. After the murder on Niulan Street, Fan Xian had been thinking about certain issues. Teng Zijing had already gone to the countryside to recuperate, and he didn't know if he would become disabled. The families of the 3 dead guards had received sufficient compensation, and even the relevant departments of the court had issued commendations. The guards were buried in the Fan clan's tomb on the outskirts of the capital. If Fan Xian could leave the capital, he would naturally pay his respects. The bloody facts had taught him that surviving in this world was not just a matter of romance. Naturally, it was not just about treating others to a meal. Therefore, he needed to have his own strength, such as Wang Qinian, Fan Xijia, and his own martial arts cultivation. Now that he was in the capital, he changed his meditation time from noon to night. Every time he was half awake, he always felt the zhenqi in the snow-capped mountain behind his back like a pool of warm water, cleansing every part of his body comfortably. Vaguely, it seemed that the amount and density of this zhenqi had increased to some extent. Fan Xian still felt it was somewhat inconceivable that he had been able to kill an 8th-level master while being harassed by the 2 female assassins. He had investigated the zhenqi flow of Teng Zijing and the other guards, and found that no one in the world practiced the same way as he did. This realization did not make him feel the slightest bit panicked. Since he could rely on a slender dagger and a sleeve crossbow to kill an 8th-level master, it proved that his zhenqi was very useful. He was different from the martial cultivators of this world. In his mind, there was no such thing as an unbreakable barrier between levels. The bloody puddle of water with the big man proved that as long as you were ruthless and accurate, so what if you were one of the 5 great grandmasters? But there was still no progress on the 2nd volume of the tyrannical scroll. Fan Xian's gaze fell on the box that had been casually tossed in the corner of the room. After coming to the capital, he seemed to have forgotten about the item his mother had left him. It seemed that he would have to find the key sometime. Si Lily, an important suspect in the assassination case, had not yet been escorted back to the capital when an imperial edict flashed across the sky like a bolt of lightning. This edict, issued from deep within the palace, was about Fan Xian. In the context of the previous day, the content of this edict was particularly different. By the will of heaven, the emperor has decreed. The eunuch's lips kept moving, but he couldn't make out what he was saying. Kneeling in the main hall of Fan Manor, Fan Xian was afraid that the eunuch in front of him would spit on his face. Frowning, he looked at the increasingly wet bricks in front of him. Finally, the imperial edict was read out. Under Lady Lu's instructions, Fan Xian followed the rules. After shouting, "Long live the emperor," he thanked the eunuch and accepted the imperial edict. Lady Lu handed over a banknote without the slightest hint of anger. Only then did the eunuch leave, satisfied. "Where do we put this?" Fan Xian asked Lady Lu, holding the imperial edict in his hands. "We can't just keep holding it, can we?" Lu sure took it with a smile. "Although the Fu often receives edicts, we can't say that it's just a toy. The Fu has a special room for it." Recently, Fan Xian and Lady Lu had maintained a subtle, superficial harmony between them. This was the result of the times, but neither side knew what would happen in the future. "To tell the truth, I've also studied scriptures, but why can't I understand what that eunuch was saying?" Returning to his bedroom, Fan Xian rebandaged the wound on his right shoulder. He looked at his sister, who was sitting at the table and looking at him with a faint smile. Eunuch Dai is from Yanwei, and his accent has always been difficult to understand. But these years, he often comes to the Fu to announce edicts, so I can understand a bit. Fan Xian hurriedly asked, "What did the imperial edict say? Why was it given to me?" Fan Ruoruo pursed her lips and smiled. Instead of answering directly, she said, "Actually, the palace has been rewarding the family for the past 10 years. Although father's title has been suppressed, my brother and I, and even Lady Lu, have all been rewarded. Now it seems that it's my turn." Fan Xian knew about these things. Even that little Fan Xijia had the title of Cavalry Commander of Grace. But this involved him, so he couldn't help but be curious. "I haven't returned to my ancestral home. Even if the palace wanted to reward me, there wouldn't be a title." "That's right. So this time, His Majesty's edict only said that in the last incident, you killed an enemy spy or something." That was a meritorious service to the country, and so you were specially made a functionary of Taichung Temple. Functionary of Taichung Temple? Fan Xian's voice was filled with surprise. Taichung Temple was the place where the patriarch worshipped the temple. Although functionary was only an 8th-level official, he could enter and leave the temple at will. Ever since he and Lin Wan had met, he had often guessed the identity of the noble who had worshipped the temple. Since it was Wan, Er's elder, and Wan had grown up in the palace, it seemed that the noble must have been some important person in the palace. Perhaps it was the Empress Dowager or the eldest princess. But when he visited Wan, a few nights ago, he knew that she was worried about the conflict of interest after her marriage, so he deliberately refrained from asking. Could it be that this edict contained some sort of meaning? Fan Xian frowned. If that important person was able to persuade His Majesty to make such an edict, it was to clarify what had happened in the temple that day. Then what was she thinking? Was it a show of goodwill? Or was it a demonstration? Fan Ruoruo saw him frowning in thought, and finally couldn't help but laugh. Pointing at her brother, she said, "Brother, when it comes to you, you're always confused. The functionary of Taichung Temple is an official position that every princess must assume before they marry." Fan Xian suddenly understood, and smiled with some embarrassment. It seemed that the marriage had finally been decided. Then he remembered that because of his injury, he hadn't been to the royal courtyard for many days. Wan must have been very worried when she found out about the assassination attempt. He didn't know if her condition had worsened. Would she be worried? Fan Xian suddenly felt a little confused. That icy woman had a mother like that, and a father like that. Yesterday, I asked my sister to go there for me. Did you deliver the letter? He asked, suppressing the slight uneasiness in his heart. Fan Ruoruo calmly replied, "Yes, she did. Sister-in-law listened to you, brother, and talked to that servant girl. Now she's secretly eating good food every day, and her body is recovering well. She was just a little worried when she heard about the assassination attempt. But yesterday, I was in a hurry, and Yi Ling, was by my side, so I couldn't write a letter." Fan Xian sighed, and didn't say anything. Fan Ruoruo was the person who understood Fan Xian the best in the world. Hearing him sigh, she knew what he was worried about. Romeo and Juliet. Ruoruo had heard her brother tell this love story when she was young, and she remembered it. Smiling, she encouraged him, "Brother, you said that people should have the courage to pursue happiness." Fan Xian was very moved. He took his sister into his arms, and patted her slightly thin back. "Don't worry. Those 2 people died from drinking poison, and the other committed suicide with a dagger. But your brother specializes in making poison and playing with daggers. It's very different. Are your injuries better?" Seeing the young man jump in through the window, Lin Wan felt sorry for him and let him lie down on the bed. "Why did you come here when you're in such a bad shape?" Fan Xian said bitterly, "I was worried about you, and worried about me." Lin Wan's heart warmed. Hearing these 2 worries, she poured out the remaining tea in her teacup and brewed some new tea. Bringing it to his lips, she quietly said, "I listened to you. These days, I've been taking good care of my body. You have to take good care of yours too." Fan Xian took the teacup with one hand and blew away the white mist. "How can a princess serve others?" he asked gently. Lin Wan bit her lower lip. "If you make me angry again, I'll throw you out. Are you willing to?" Fan Xian looked at her with a mischievous smile. "I've decided. After we get married, we'll go to a villa in the Tsang Mountains for the winter." Fan Xian leaned against the bed and looked at his fiancée, who was looking at him with a face full of worry. He smiled. "It's good for your illness, and I believe that before that, teacher Fei Jie should have returned to the capital. Don't just think about me." Lin Wan bit her lower lip. Her white teeth looked very cute against her red lips. What if something like this happens again in the future? Fan Xian couldn't remember how many times he had snuck into the boudoir in the middle of the night. The guards in the villa were truly unlucky. Not once had they discovered him, nor did they know that this pair of fiancé and fiancée were already so familiar with each other. Regarding this matter, Fan Xian had enough pride. Think about it, this was like a small palace outside of the imperial palace. In all of history, which thief could steal as much as he did? What else could have happened? Northern Qi isn't stupid. Since they've already been exposed this time, the court won't be fooled if they use the same method again. Lin Wan said worriedly. I'm just afraid that there are some people in the court who would dare to attack you again because they'll use Northern Qi as a cover for future assassinations. Fan Xian had long known that his fiancée was a smart person. She had also grown up in the palace. Although she was loved by the Empress Dowager, she had grown up in a very complicated environment, so she knew more about officialdom than he did. Hearing her say this, he smiled and raised her soft chin, pinching it. Don't worry. I firmly believe that I'm the luckiest person in the world. Lin Wan felt ticklish under her chin. She was both happy and nervous about this intimate action. Immediately, 2 patches of red appeared on her snow-white skin. She quickly pushed Fan Xian's hand away and said with some embarrassment, "People can't live by luck." Fan Xian loved seeing her bashful appearance. I'm already lucky enough to have you. Having me, is that important? Lin Wan lowered her head slightly. From this angle, her long eyelashes trembled slightly. She was clearly nervous. It's very important. Fan Xian pulled her into his arms. He wasn't very good at sweet-talking, so he was also a little nervous. He clumsily tried to find her lips. Lin Wan felt a wave of manly scent hit her in the face. She couldn't help but feel her body soften. She leaned weakly against his chest. She turned her head and said softly, "Just who wants to kill you?" As she turned her head, she coincidentally avoided Fan Xian's wolfish kiss. Fan Xian was very angry, and hearing this question, his heart chilled. He hugged the soft body in his arms, and his hands unconsciously slid down her back. Don't worry about it. Chapter 95. Lin Wan felt a tingling sensation on her back and couldn't help but laugh. If it was my parents. She persisted. Fan Xian's hand, which had been enjoying the beauty of the woman in his arms, suddenly stopped. He looked at her seriously. If it really was the eldest princess and the prime minister, what would we do? Fortunately, when the two of them were talking about these things, their bodies were still very alluring, effectively diluting the seriousness and horror of the topic. After a long silence, Lin Wan bravely looked into his eyes and wrapped her arms around his neck. If I marry you, I will be the daughter-in-law of the Fan family. Fan Xian understood the meaning of these words. Although the sweet night talk in the boudoir had been tinged with worry, he knew that his fiancée had grown up in the palace and had been brought up by the Empress Dowager. She rarely lived with the eldest princess, so the relationship between mother and daughter was a little distant. But hearing this answer, Fan Xian still found it difficult to extricate himself. This young man and woman had similar life backgrounds and growth experiences, so they understood each other's pain and pride. It was because of this that they had decided to spend the rest of their lives together in the Temple of Qing. How could there be feelings in the royal family? But Fan Xian had given this young woman an unprecedented emotional impact and gentleness, and Fan Xian himself had found space in this dark boudoir to rest his tired mind. When will you be able to go out for a walk? Fan Xian held her. Lin Wan carefully lay on his left shoulder to avoid touching his wound. Hearing this, she replied helplessly, I've been in the palace since I was a child, and rarely had the opportunity to go out. It was only 4 years ago that my uncle gave me the status of a princess that I had the opportunity to go out. But lately my body has been a little weak. She looked at him carefully. Do you think it's too improper to be so sneaky all the time? Fan Xian was startled. He lowered his voice and laughed. I like this kind of sneaky feeling the most, but with your illness, you still need to move around and bask in the sun. Hearing him admit that he liked this kind of sneaky feeling, Lin Wanner couldn't help but think of how absurd she had been these nights, letting this young man lie next to her. Her cheeks couldn't help but burn. She spat and said, then tomorrow I'll go to the palace and ask my uncle. Uncle? Fan Xian heard her address him so intimately and couldn't help but laugh in a low voice. Yes, our uncle is the most powerful emperor in the world. With a word from him, you are my wife. It was only then that Fan Xian remembered and told them about the imperial edict. Hearing the contents of the imperial edict, Lin Wanner knew that the man next to her had already been conferred the title of functionary of Taichung Temple. She knew that this marriage had finally been decided. She was pleasantly surprised, but couldn't help but feel embarrassed. Fan Xian smiled slightly at the blush on her face. He thought to himself that this girl was gentle and intelligent, yet she was so shy. In the end, he still thought that the women in this world were the same as the women in his previous life. He never thought that he would climb the wall in the middle of the night. For a dignified princess, it was already a big deal. By the way, when we first met at the Temple of Qing, who were you with? With His Majesty, Lin Wanner replied curiously. Fan Xian thought of how he had brushed shoulders with the emperor, and couldn't help but feel something different. Since that person was His Majesty, then the ace who had exchanged blows with him was naturally the head of the palace guards. Thinking of how he had only spat out a few mouthfuls of blood after exchanging blows with the head of the guards, he couldn't help but feel a little proud. Lin Wanner saw the changing expressions on his face and became interested. She stared into his eyes and asked, What? Are you surprised? I can only blame myself for being stupid. I didn't think of going there. Fan Xian smiled bitterly. I always thought it was the Empress Dowager or the eldest princess. Alas, after coming to this world, if I didn't even see the emperor, it would be too much of a pity. Although I don't pay much attention to the outside world, I know that the Fan family is very favored by the emperor. If you want to see His Majesty, it won't be difficult. Besides, the girl lowered her head shyly. After the wedding, I will have to go to the palace to pay my respects to my uncle. Hearing the word wedding and seeing the girl's shy expression, Fan Xian's heart skipped a beat. Holding Lin Wanner's left hand, he sneakily slid down, following her waistline all the way down. Finally, he touched that soft and plump place. His heart skipped a beat, and gradually became lascivious. He rubbed his palm over and over again, only to feel smooth and soft under his palm. It was very pleasing. The reason why Lin Wanner had endured her shyness and allowed Fan Xian to accompany her in bed every night was because she realized that her elegant and refined fiancé was a gentleman. After so many days, he had only tasted her and left satisfied. He had never done anything too out of line. Only then did Lin Wanner relax, and in the depths of her heart, she felt inexplicably proud. She hadn't thought that today, after being injured, he would become lustful. So when Lin Wanner felt her buttocks being rubbed by that hand, she didn't react for a moment. She stared stupidly at Fan Xian for a few seconds, watching as the desire in his eyes grew stronger and stronger. Only then did she come to her senses with a soft cry. Her face was flushed red, and she reached behind her to pull away the other's perverted claws. Fan Xian had long since lost his mind. How could he let her go? He turned to the side and pulled her into his arms. His right hand was injured, so he wrapped his legs around the struggling girl like a large koala bear. He lowered his head and kissed her on her sandalwood lips. As soon as he touched her, it was moist and warm. After a long time, the two of them slowly separated. Fan Xian felt relaxed and happy, and didn't know what to say. Lin Wanner's eyes gradually became misty, but they were hazy with tears. She was so embarrassed that she almost cried. Fan Xian looked at Lin Wanner's expression and was stunned for a moment. He didn't know what to say. He quickly smiled and explained, "I couldn't control it. I couldn't control it. You're a bully." Lin Wanner sobbed, but she didn't dare to disturb the guards in the garden or the old nanny downstairs, so her voice was quiet. "When did I do that?" Fan Xian felt wronged. They were almost husband and wife, so what was wrong with a little intimacy? As if guessing what the young man was thinking, Lin Wanner puffed up her cheeks and said, "There are still a few months." Fan Xian looked at her with a mischievous smile and said, "We've already spent so many nights together. Why should we care about that?" Lin Wanner was most afraid of this saying. Hearing him say it, she was extremely embarrassed. She clenched her fists and threw them at him, but, halfway through, she remembered that he was injured, so she could only pull them back. Who would have thought that when she turned around, she would accidentally bump into something indecent? No matter how gentle and composed Wanner was, she knew what was going on. She couldn't care less about Fan Xian's injury. She pushed him away from the bed curtain. "Go back early. I'm still injured." Lin Wanner buried her face in the blankets, not daring to look at him. Fan Xian's gaze naturally fell. He looked at himself and said, "Then I'll come see you tomorrow." Lin Wanner pulled down the blankets a little, revealing her pitiful face. She begged, "Don't you have official business tomorrow?" "Ah, right. The bookstore opens the day after tomorrow." Fan Xian remembered that the people from the Overwatch Council had not returned to the capital yet. There was nothing to be found in the capital. Since that was the case, he might as well do what he needed to do. Sharpening a knife doesn't delay cutting people down. Could this count as one of his good qualities? He couldn't bear to bully this girl anymore, so he opened the window and prepared to leave. The moonlight shone in and shone on the bed, as well as on the sleeping servant girl. Fan Xian couldn't help but snicker. He wondered if this servant girl would grow fatter in a few days, since she slept so well every day. The next day, the bookstore opened for business. Dongchuan Road was bustling with people. Even the nearby Imperial College had a rare trend of truancy. The buildings on the side of the street were decorated with lanterns and streamers. The square front was completely wrapped in high-quality wood. It shone brightly in the jet-black darkness. It was truly a very bookish decoration. Unfortunately, there were too many people today, and the smell of sweat replaced the scent of books. Most of the people who came were here to see Fan Xian. Everyone was curious as to how the illegitimate son of Fan Manor, who had only been in the capital for a little more than a month, could do so well. They were even more curious as to why a noble young master who was skilled in both literature and martial arts would want to open a bookstore. There were many profitable businesses in this world, and selling books did not seem like a good way to make a living. Ever since the assassination, Fan Xian's view of life had changed a lot, so this bookstore did not hide behind the scenes. Instead, it stood out in the open and admitted that he and his brother were the owners of this bookstore. He also gave the bookstore a name, Danbo Bookstore. He also asked the Crown Prince to go home and have King Jing personally write the name. Only then did he make a horizontal plaque and hang it on the door. The people around him were suspicious as to what the bookstore's name meant. Fan Xian explained that it was Danbo to show one's will. In fact, it meant do not be troubled, do not worry, and do not lose one's will. He then threw out Zhuge Liang's phrase, do not be Danbo to show one's will. Without tranquility, one cannot go far. When the Crown Prince first heard this explanation, he was also shocked. He thought that Fan Xian was using this to confess to the people of the court that he did not want to meddle in anything, and that he was showing weakness in exchange for safety. In fact, only Fan Ruoruo understood her brother the best. She knew that Danbo meant that he had once drifted in Danzhou. Seeing that more and more people were gathering around, Fan Xian's forehead began to sweat. He muttered to the shopkeeper next to him, "I was talking about advertising. The effect was a bit too good. How come there are so many people just opening today?" Shopkeeper Yi is no stranger to the word advertisement. He laughed and said, "I heard that the owner has Mr. Chao's manuscript in his hands. After the 68th chapter, we are the only ones to publish it. Just the reputation of Story of the Stone is enough to attract so many people." He paused, then laughed. "Of course, everyone is mainly here to see you. They want to see what a young poet who can kill an 8th-level master looks like." Fan Xian was startled. "I'm not 8 feet tall, and I'm not 8 feet wide. What's there to see?" Chapter 96. Whether Fan Xian was willing or not, people came in droves to congratulate him. Perhaps it was because they had found a rare opportunity to get closer to Assistant Minister Fan, or perhaps it was because they knew that the emperor had already made Fan Xian a functionary of Taichung Temple, and that his marriage to someone in the palace was imminent. All the officials gave him face and sent their subordinates to congratulate him. Even the manors of the princes and dukes sent people to deliver gifts. On Dongchuan Road, there was an endless stream of sedan chairs, and the sound of greetings could be heard everywhere. Gift boxes almost filled the entire meeting room. The onlookers on the street clicked their tongues in wonder. It was just a bookstore, and yet it had caused such a commotion. This Master Fan, who excelled in both the pen and the sword, was no ordinary person. The biggest benefit of the opening scene was that from now on, Danbo Bookstore would no longer have to worry about being harassed by the people of the underworld, and there would be very few official problems. Fan Xian calmly looked at the scene, and cupped his hands in greeting to the guests. He knew that most of them had come for his father's sake. Fortunately, the bookstore was too small, and the guests were not important people. They only chatted for a bit, and after explaining which family they were from, they took their leave. After these people left, they were still a bit suspicious. Why was a member of the Fan family doing business? It should be noted that being a merchant was not a very honorable job. At that moment, Crown Prince Jing, Li Hongqing, finally arrived. The people on the street who knew who he was all bowed to him, and he returned their greetings with a warm expression, without a trace of the arrogance of a member of the royal family. His face was like a spring breeze, and he was very scholarly. Seeing him enter the store, some passers-by asked curiously, "This Danbo bookstore has quite a bit of face. King Jing and the Fan family have always had a good relationship, don't you know?" Fan Xian saw that he had arrived, and his heart trembled. Such a gentle person like the spring breeze was willing to rush forward for the sake of the second prince. What kind of person was the second prince? He smiled and shook his head, driving all these thoughts out of his mind. He walked out of the store. He still wanted to have a simpler relationship with Li Hongqing. The two of them entered a quiet room in the back. Li Hongqing looked around at the decorations and sighed. "Looks like you really did invest a lot of money. I only took 1,700 taels of silver." Fan Xian poured him a cup of tea. Small business, not worthy of the crown prince's attention. Li Hongqing accepted the tea and shook his head. "You people of the Fan family are the best at making money. This is something all the officials know. But Count Sinan earns money for the court, while you earn it for yourself. It's not the same." Fan Xian smiled. "When you earn money, you have to pay taxes to the court. Even if you earn some for yourself, you can't keep it in your hands and let it rust. If you take it out and use it, you'll be helping other people's businesses. If other people's businesses are doing well, the court will pay more taxes. Therefore, no matter where you do business, as long as you can make money, the money will eventually go to the imperial court, and in the end, it will be used on the people." Li Hongqing was a little confused, but he seemed to understand a little. He clapped his hands and sighed in admiration. Just a few words, but they seemed to make a lot of sense. The court has always respected agriculture and restrained commerce. I was wondering why you chose to make a living like this, and whether you had no intention of becoming an official. So that's how it is. Fan Xian felt very embarrassed. In his previous life, when he wasn't sick, he could only score from the bottom in political economy. It was just idle chatter. How did it become sense? He quickly stopped and changed the subject. All right, all right. What career? I only wrote 2 crooked poems. I'm going to be a deserter in next year's competition. Li Hongqing, who had been troubled by Fan Xian's strength of character for a long time, finally used his fan again in front of him. He incessantly fanned his neck and laughed. If you write a crooked poem, how are you going to let those people in the Imperial College live? Look, there were so many students outside who wanted to pay their respects to the great poet Fan. If it weren't for your servants blocking the way, I'm afraid it wouldn't have been so peaceful. Fan Xian's face was full of worry. Those students of the Imperial College, some of them old enough to be my grandfather, still call me a student. I can't take it anymore. Li Hongqing laughed and pointed his fan at him. Your face is full of worry, but your words are so mischievous. You really are an interesting person. Fan Xian rolled his eyes. What was so interesting about him? He asked, I troubled you to write these words. When will you take me to your manor to pay my respects to the old man? Li Hongqing was startled. He remembered that the young man in front of him didn't even know that his father had met him before. He smiled and didn't point it out. He was ready to laugh at the young man of the Fan family in the future. Whenever you want to go, go. There's no need to say anything to me. Crown Prince Jing, Li Hongqing, had always felt that Fan Xian was far more mature than he had been at 16 or 17. He wasn't impervious to praise or humiliation, but at least he was unusually calm. He had always wanted to see through Fan Xian's calmness. Suddenly, he clapped his hands. Right, I forgot to congratulate you, brother Fan. Fan Xian was startled. He didn't know what to congratulate him about. Li Hongqing stood up. Congratulations on receiving the position of functionary of Taichung Temple. The birds at the gate are chirping. You must drink with them. Fan Xian laughed. So that's what it is. You should have known about it a long time ago. In the past, it was only a rumor in the palace. It didn't come to pass, so of course it doesn't count. Li Hongqing seemed to be thinking of something, and his brows suddenly furrowed. He suddenly thought of something. The second prince and he had always thought that even if the Fan family didn't side with him, they wouldn't stand on the side of the crown prince. But they seemed to have overlooked a very important issue. After Fan Xian got married, his wife was the illegitimate daughter of the prime minister. It was hard to say that she wouldn't slowly lean towards that side. So he suddenly lowered his voice. See, Lily is going to be escorted back to the capital. Perhaps we'll be able to find out who is colluding with Northern Qi. Fan Xian had no idea that in the blink of an eye, Li Hongqing had thought of so many things. He was slightly startled, and then smiled bitterly. I'm just an ant. I just hope that the nobles in the court don't care about me. Li Hongqing looked at him. He knew that Fan Xian wasn't telling the truth, but he didn't point it out. He smiled. In short, it's the same as when you beat up Guo Baoquan. If you need me to do anything, don't be shy. Of course, Fan Xian replied. Then he changed his mind and said something else. I plan to open a tofu shop in the south of the city. Are you interested in buying a share? Li Hongqing was drinking tea and almost swallowed it. He tidied up his clothes in a fluster. A tofu shop doesn't make much money, he said. At least a bookstore makes money from books. That's sour money. Fan Xian chuckled and ignored him. He thought that he would wait until the time came to deliver the freshly squeezed soy milk to the prince's manor. When he was in Danzhou, he had eaten a lot of tofu, but because of the different eating habits of the seaside, he rarely drank soy milk. After coming to the capital, he had drunk it a few times, but he always felt that there was too much residue. He didn't know if it was a problem with the process, so he decided to improve it. At dusk, after school, Fan Xizha finally sneaked in through the back door. After being taught a lesson by Fan Xian last time, he had also taught a lesson to his schoolmate. He felt good, so going to school didn't feel like a chore. But today was the opening of the bookstore. From choosing the location to choosing the paper, from hiring the shopkeeper to setting the price, everything had been handled by him. He couldn't help but be nervous, so he came early. As soon as he entered the bookstore, he sighed for not being able to see the grand scene of the day. Then he dove into the accounts room. Fan Xian drank tea and waited for him. After a while, Fan Xizha walked out, his face full of confusion and innocence. Fan Xian was shocked. "What happened?" he asked. Fan Xizha mumbled for a long time. Finally, he caught his breath and scolded, "We earned a lot more than we thought." "Huh? Is that so?" Fan Xian had thought that it would be good to have some business on the first day of the store's opening. He hadn't expected this. He took the account book from his brother and looked at the figures. His heart couldn't help but tremble. Not to mention the fact that the detailed edition of Story of the Stone had sold more than 80 copies, even the collection of classics and histories that Wansong Hall had asked to be printed on their behalf had been bought by many scholars. Fan Xian counted on his fingers. He felt that doing business was really something that gave him a sense of accomplishment. Today is the opening. Many people who are friends with our family have come to support us. Naturally, there won't be such a good thing in the future. Fan Xian looked at Fan Xizha, whose eyes had become like copper coins, and carefully reminded him. Fan Xizha swallowed and looked at his brother enviously. "Big brother, I know. But you can sit in the bookstore every day, and I can only hide. I really envy you." Fan Xian laughed. "Do you like being a businessman that much? Father's title is still waiting for you to inherit. Study hard, and in the future, you may be in charge of all the money in the court. Then I'll have to be the Minister of Revenue." Fan Xizha's face was gloomy. Father was a third-ranked official, but he's still just an assistant minister. That old minister has been bedridden for years, and the court hasn't let him take his place. At most, I can donate some scholarly honors. I'm afraid that's not going to happen. Fan Xian looked at his brother with some surprise. Although this kid was stubborn and unbearably bad, he was unexpectedly shrewd when it came to looking at things. After thinking for a moment, he said, "If you want to do business, then do it. I'll talk to father." Fan Xizha was overjoyed, but he suddenly frowned. "But what about mother?" Fan Xian's heart skipped a beat. He thought of Lady Lu, whom he hadn't thought about for a long time. Fan Manor in the capital seemed to be happy and harmonious, but who knew how long this seemingly wonderful situation would last? Chapter 97. Fan Xian held Xizha's hand as they walked out of the bookstore. Suddenly, he thought of something. He turned around and said to shopkeeper Yi in a sincere tone, "About the matter we talked about a few days ago, I would like to trouble you to arrange it." Shopkeeper Yi did not understand why this young master was interested in the survivors of Qingyu Hall, but he still nodded in agreement. The 17 shopkeepers had long since grown accustomed to life in the capital, working for various manors. Although they could not run their own businesses, their lives could be considered wealthy. Fan Xizha asked curiously, "Big brother, what arrangements? Do you know what kind of place Qingyu Hall is?" "Of course I do." Fan Xizha had offered a large sum of money to hire this shopkeeper Yi, so of course Fan Xizha knew about him. He said, "These are the shopkeepers of the Yi family. If I could run a business and have a group of capable people, how great would that be?" Fan Xian was startled. He increasingly felt that he had been too careful. It seemed that the name of the Yi family had long since become a thing of the past. The people of the capital no longer saw it as some sort of taboo. When he boarded the carriage that had come to pick him up, he found Ruoruo waiting inside. Fan Xian blamed himself. "If I had known you were coming, I would have come out earlier." Fan Xizha looked at his sister and felt an inexplicable fear. "I just came to take a look. This business has nothing to do with me. Don't tell father." Hearing this, Fan Ruoruo's originally indifferent face showed a trace of a smile. "We're all family. Who would want you to be flogged?" Dongchuan Road, which had been noisy during the day, was now quiet. Fan Manor's carriage rattled toward the eastern part of the capital. That was the home of the 3 boys and girls in the carriage. The sun was setting, and the carriage's shadow was long. It slid forward on the flagstones of the street, bouncing up and down as the flagstones rose and fell. It seemed as if it were struggling to escape the coolness of the flagstones and plunge into the fiery red of dusk. It was still the same old saying. Fan Xian felt that his current family life was quite happy. Happiness was such a thing. Since he had already grasped a few strands of hair in his hands, he had to hold on tighter. So Count Sinan, Fan Jian, was constrained by his official status and was unable to find out the truth of the assassination attempt against him, so he had to endure it for now. However, Fan Xian was currently a free and unfettered person, so he had no misgivings. In order to complete the 3 goals of his rebirth, he could not accept being in an unsafe environment. In his previous life, the United Nations had once said that people should have the freedom to be free from fear. Although Fan Xian did not understand politics, he thought to himself, "Even if I wear it, I still have human rights, right?" Wang Qinian sat at the table, his face ashen. He had rented this house with Master Fan's banknotes before he left the capital. It was in an inconspicuous location, and no one should have noticed it. Fan Xian quickly pushed the tea over and said, "You've worked hard." Seeing him use honorifics, Wang Qinian didn't dare accept it. He hurriedly reported the mission. As you expected, when Si Lily and her party returned to the capital, they were intercepted. However, the council was prepared and defeated the enemy in one fell swoop. According to Master's orders, after leaving Cangzhou, I have been following the troops in the council. Those people who tried to intercept us were disguised as horse bandits, but looking at their movements, they should be soldiers. Fan Xian was startled. How did the military get involved? He carefully asked, "Is it the provincial government army or what?" "I'm not sure." Wang Qinian thought for a moment, then said, "According to Master's orders, we only followed them. In the end, we discovered that the leading officer had escaped to Wuzhou." Wuzhou? Correct. That night, the officer met with the Wuzhou army. Wang Qinian suddenly remembered that there were some things he had to explain. He quickly said, "Actually, there was someone else who followed them with me." "Who?" "Zhong Zhui." Fan Xian suddenly understood. "You once said that Zhong Zhui, who was as famous as you were back then. Didn't you say that he was always by Master Chen's side?" He suddenly understood. It seemed that, like him, the Overwatch Council was also using Si Lily to track down clues behind the scenes. "Yes. That day, I saw Director Chen's carriage from afar. The Black Knights were also there. Otherwise, there was no way they could have resisted the cavalry." Wang Qinian was a little embarrassed. "Master Fan, since the council is already investigating, should we continue?" Let's not rush into this. Who in the court is the Wuzhou army subordinate to?" "They are very careful. The army officer's surname is Fang, and his first name is Xiu. He doesn't have much of a background, but he is a distant relative of General Fang of the City Patrol Division. Fan Xian furrowed his brows in thought. The City Patrol Division must have played a dishonorable role in this matter. But how should he dig further? In other words, should he really continue digging? If too many important figures were involved, it would be difficult to clean up the mess. He, who had been promoted by the court as a heroic figure, might be forced to play another role. He took a deep breath. His lips were a little pale. When will see Lily arrive? He asked quietly. Tomorrow. Wang Qinian looked at him and suddenly said, "The director is also returning to the capital tomorrow. Master Fan, should we first ask for the director's permission before asking for Si Lily to be interrogated? What about Master Fei?" "I don't think so." Hearing that Fei hadn't returned to the capital, Fan Xian was a little disappointed. But thinking that Chen Pingping would be returning soon, his spirits rose. The Overwatch Council had been created by his mother. Although so many years had passed, people's hearts would always change. But the scene he saw when he was born into this world, and his teacher's careful teaching, made Fan Xian believe that the Overwatch Council was not an enemy or a friend. It was one of his own. At this moment, he felt like a motherless child who was being bullied, and suddenly a large group of burly uncles came to help him fight. The little fellow wiped away the dirty tears on his face as he thought, F***CKU, who else in the capital would dare to bully me in the future? At that moment, Wang Qinian suddenly laughed. "Congratulations, master." It seemed that even he, who had just returned to the capital, knew that Fan Xian had become functionary of Taichung Temple. It was just that most people didn't know who he would marry in the palace. Fan Xian smiled helplessly and didn't say anything. There was a saying in the officialdom of the Kingdom of Qing, "There is nothing in the world that the Overwatch Council can't find out, even if it's the silver you hide in your chamber pot." Fan Xian also believed this. Although his father's subordinates hadn't found any clues, if there was anyone in the world who could find out, it had to be Chen Pingping. For the sake of safety, Fan Xian had Wang Qinian temporarily stop his activities. He only had him arrange for some people to closely follow the council's every move. The entire officialdom reacted to Director Chen's return to the capital. It was said that the night Chen Pingping returned, he was summoned to the palace by the emperor. After a long night of discussion, the emperor let the tired Chen Pingping return to his manor. The civil and military officials were envious of Chen Pingping's undiminished royal favor, but they also silently cursed that the old man had fallen ill from overwork and should have retired. While the director was in the palace, the Overwatch Council's operations were carried out in an orderly manner. That night, a large group of officials from the First Bureau of the Overwatch Council broke into the city patrol yamen with a murderous aura and began to search. Another group headed straight for the manor of the general in the south of the city. On a tall tree outside the brigadier general's manor, Fan Xian held the branch firmly with both hands. The zhenqi in his body slowly flowed, quietly disappearing into the dense foliage. His eyes were cold as he looked at the chaos in the manor. Not long after, the operation was over. The disappointed officials of the Overwatch Council retreated from the back courtyard, bringing with them a disappointing result. General Fang Darren of the City Patrol had committed suicide to escape punishment. Just an hour before the Overwatch Council arrived, he had hanged himself from a beam. Fan Xian sighed and waited for the crowd to disperse before slipping down the tree. Walking on the quiet night street, he was still thinking about this matter. Fang Darren was a military general. Even though his collusion with Northern Qi had been exposed and he had chosen to commit suicide, pulling out a knife and cutting his own throat seemed to be more in line with a martial man's personality. His death by hanging was too full of resentment in the palace. It was probably not something he was willing to do. His heart jumped, and he could no longer restrain himself. He went to the address Wang Qinian had left him. The Wang family's house was in an ordinary alley in the south of the city. At night, the men would lie outside in the shade and sip tea, but the wives of the wives would be locked up. Fan Xian walked along the street inconspicuously, found the right place, and disappeared into the dark corner of the alley. Although Wang Qinian was a low-ranking official, he was still a member of the Overwatch Council. The reason why he seemed so poor after his resignation was because he had used all his savings to buy this small courtyard. When Fan Xian entered the courtyard, Wang Qinian was looking at his son with a face full of love. He was fanning himself with a large palm leaf fan. Hearing some movement, he alertly turned his head and saw Fan Xian's clean and beautiful face. He couldn't help but be shocked. "Shoo." Fan Xian gestured to him and quietly followed him to a quiet place. Wang Qinian didn't think that after reporting to the young man earlier in the day, Fan Xian would immediately come looking for him again. With a face full of suspicion, he asked, "Sir, what happened?" Fan Xian told him about Fong Daren's suicide. Wang Qinian frowned. "They acted quickly. This is going to be difficult. Take me to the prison." "I want to see Lily," Fan Xian said. "The council is investigating. If we interfere now, won't it cause a misunderstanding?" Wang Qinian was more thorough in his considerations than Fan Xian. Fan Xian thought for a moment, then said helplessly, "Sir Chen has been summoned to the palace. I'm afraid something might happen in the prison." Wang Qinian thought that he really had to hurry. "Sir," he said respectfully, "it's best if you don't get involved in these matters. Let me handle it." Fan Xian shook his head. "Let's go together." To tell the truth, he had always been curious about the Overwatch Council's prison. Of course, he was also curious about Lily. It was already night in the capital. In the darkness that was as thick as ink, there was a sprinkling of light. The Lujing River was the brightest, followed by the alley. And the darkest place among the ink was the Overwatch Council. That night, Wang Qinian led a mysterious man in a grey robe into the Overwatch Council's prison. Chapter 98. Because the Overwatch Council was directly under the command of the Emperor, the Kingdom of Qing's celestial prison was not in the Ministry of Justice, nor was it in the Supreme Court. Instead, it was here, where serious criminals were kept, and security was particularly tight. The celestial prison was not far from the Overwatch Council, just around the corner. If anything happened, they could immediately provide assistance. Wang Qinian, at least on the surface, was no longer a member of the Overwatch Council. But with the token in Fan Xian's hand, the two of them easily gained the trust of the guards and entered the celestial prison. The two iron doors of the celestial prison opened without a sound, without the eerie grinding sound that Fan Xian had imagined. The guards carefully examined the tokens, then respectfully invited the two of them in, and closed the iron doors from the outside. Behind the iron doors was a long corridor leading downward, lit by dim oil lamps on both sides. The stone steps were slightly slippery, but there was not a speck of moss on them. It seemed that they had been carefully taken care of. As they walked down, they saw a guard every few steps. They looked unremarkable, but upon closer inspection, Fan Xian found that they were all at least of the 4th level. After walking for an unknown period of time, the air became a little turbid. It blended with the turbid lights in the surroundings, causing one's senses to become a little sluggish. It was as if this place had already broken away from the fresh and clean mortal world, and had already reached the Yellow Springs evil land. "Sir, please show us the relevant documents or edicts from the inner palace." A muddy jailer glanced at Wang Qinian. Wang Qinian was very respectful to the jailer, and handed over Fan Xian's token. The head jailer looked very old. The wrinkles on both sides of his cheeks had been squeezed into ridges. He took the waist tag and looked at Wang Qinian with a strange expression. "Little Wang, you've been promoted?" Wang Qinian respectfully stepped to the side, revealing Fan Xian, who was completely covered in a grey robe. Today, I accompanied this sir to the trial. The jailer realized that he could not see their faces clearly, but he knew the weight of the token in his hand. He nodded, took out a key from the table, opened the door next to him, and waved for the two of them to enter. Fan Xian frowned, wondering if he would have to ask Si Lily through the bars. He did not want to expose his voice in front of too many people, so he turned around and gave Wang Qinian a look. Wang Qinian smiled and shook his head. Seeing the metal door close behind him, Fan Xian asked curiously, "Why are you afraid of him?" Wang Qinian frowned and said, "He was the former head of the 7th Bureau. He spent his entire life in prison. When it was time for him to be released, he would rather come back and continue to be a jailer. He said he liked the smell of blood here. Tell me, how could I not be afraid of such a person?" Fan Xian shivered and thought to himself that the Overwatch Council was indeed a nest of freaks. Back then, his mother had paid for such a monstrous organization. He really didn't know what she was thinking. Following their previous directions, the two of them easily found the cell where Si Lily was being held. Looking at the beautiful woman behind the bars, Fan Xian frowned. A weak woman locked up in such a frightening place, yet her sitting posture and expression remained calm. It seemed that she had been trained in Northern Qi. But then he immediately thought that Si Lily was not a truly powerful figure. Otherwise, she would not have fled the capital at the beginning. Instead, she would have walked right into the trap and carelessly attacked a few important figures, making the Qin court uneasy every day. Fan Xian did not know that his reasoning was exactly the same as that of the official who had escorted Si Lily back to the capital. He took off the grey robe covering his head and looked at Si Lily. "Miss Lily," he said gently. Si Lily had long known that someone was coming. She had just arrived in the capital today, and someone had already come to interrogate her. It seemed that she was very important, so she deliberately put on an indifferent expression. But, she had not expected it to be Master Fan. Master Fan? Si Lily was astonished, but she forced herself not to cry out. "Miss Si, it has been over a month since we parted at the Drunken Immortal Tavern. I did not expect to see you again, under such circumstances." Thinking back to when they had shared the same bed, their fingers full of sweetness and tongues entwined, he had never imagined that this woman was a spy from Northern Qi. Si Lily seemed to have thought of something, and her face darkened. "I did not expect Master Fan to be so unfathomable." Fan Xian sighed faintly. "The thin jade rustles at the head of the river, the wind is clear and the dew at night is autumn. The immortal steed stands by the side, all first-rate in the world. I had thought that even if you and I had only coincidentally met on a reverse journey, it could still be considered fate. I really do not understand why you would have the heart to do such a cruel thing to me." This poem had been written by Qian Weiyan in his previous life. To Zhu Sai, it was about being virtuous and free from vulgarity. Fan Xian thought that since Si Lily was famous in the capital, and had always been known as a talented woman, and had always lived under the loving gazes of the people, she should have been virtuous and virtuous in her bones. At this moment, he deliberately sighed in order to weaken this female spy's will. Unexpectedly, Si Lily slowly lowered her head, as if she had not been touched. Fan Xian sighed again. "You are a beautiful woman, yet you have become a thief." Si Lily smiled sweetly. She was indeed as beautiful as orchids. "For you to enter this prison to see me, I presume your identity is not simple. We all serve our masters, so what need is there to say?" Fan Xian had finished sighing with his deadly poem, but it had been of no use. He smiled bitterly, thinking that not every woman could be so easily intoxicated by such a scene. He had been a little too absurd. He steadied his mind, and a small medicine bottle appeared in his hand. He threw the bottle in and said coldly, "This is poison. Someone will come to extort a confession. If you don't want to suffer, swallow it yourself." The small medicine bottle rolled on the hay and stopped next to Sea Lily. Sea Lily picked up the small porcelain bottle and held it tightly. She had never imagined that the gentle and amiable Fan Xian would, in the blink of an eye, become a demon tempting her to die. If she had wanted to die, she would not have fled the capital in the first place. Fan Xian had calculated this. He looked into her eyes and said softly, "Since you want to kill me, should I still cherish you? Your thinking is too absurd and laughable. Since I have pointed out a path for you to suffer less, why don't you thank me? How can someone so afraid of death be worthy of being a spy?" Sea Lily gritted her teeth in anger. She raised her head, full of hatred. Her deep eyes pierced through her slightly messy hair and stared at Fan Xian's face. Fan Xian's face was calm. "There's no need to talk about risking one's life. Actually, you are not stupid. You know that even if you confess to the high-ranking officials of the court who colluded with Northern Qi, you will still die in the end, so you might as well grit your teeth and not say anything." Sea Lily suddenly felt that Fan Xian's voice was getting further and further away, softer and softer, but also more and more terrifying. "I am not a person of the court. I simply want to find that person and get my revenge. I am willing to make a deal with you. Other than believing me, you have no other choice," Fan Xian said lightly. Fan Xian said lightly, but his tone was incomparably sinister. His voice grew lower and lower, as if he was talking to himself. "I am a person who does not mind using torture on women because you wanted to kill me first. At the same time, I am a feminist. I believe that in a battle of life and death, men and women are equal." After all, he had been digging graves since he was a child. His elegant appearance could not completely hide the gloominess and terror that occasionally erupted from his bones. Wang Qinian silently left to get the prison head to open the door, and at the same time, to prepare the relevant instruments of torture. The screams of countless weak women rang out in the dark and gloomy prison. After a long time, Fan Xian frowned slightly and looked at Sea Lily, who had fainted on a pile of hay. He looked at her bloody fingers, without a trace of emotion on his face. On the other hand, Wang Qinian, who had been silent all this time, felt a little strange. He could not believe that such an elegant and refined young master could remain so calm after witnessing such a terrifying scene of torture. He really did not know how much coldness Fan Xian hid under his gentle face. For torture to be effective, it would take at least 5 days. Wang Qinian swallowed with some difficulty and explained in a low voice, "This Sea Lily in front of us is clearly a novice, which is why she was able to force some information out of you. But in the end, she is still someone who has been trained. Once a secret that must be kept is involved, and she cannot bear the physical pain, she will naturally faint." By the time the terrifying prison had arrived, Fan Xian had already hidden his face under his grey robe. The head jailer began to pack up the instruments of torture. As he did so, he shook his head and said, "Young sir, torture is also a form of knowledge. If you want to get the answer in just an hour, it is an insult to us professionals." Fan Xian was momentarily annoyed. He turned to the side to let the prison head leave. Watching him walk away, he said to Wang Qinian with a bitter smile, "It seems that it is better to leave this to the professionals. We will wait for news in a few days. With the defenses here, I don't think anyone has the ability to sneak in and silence us." Just as he was about to leave, Sea Lily slowly woke up. She touched the wound on her finger and screamed in pain. Her lips and hands, which usually played with strings on the pleasure boat, had been destroyed today. Her lips could only make pitiful sounds. Fan Xian paused for a moment and turned to look at her through the bars. Sea Lily bit her lower lip. Her face was pale, and cold sweat had already soaked her hair. Her eyes were like those of a wounded lioness. She stared fiercely at Fan Xian's face, as if she wanted to imprint his face into her mind. Fan Xian stood silently and looked at her. Wang Qinian tactfully took the initiative to put some distance between them. Put away the medicine I gave you just now. Next time, if you really can't stand the torture, take it. Fan Xian used death to test her for the second time. His tone was very indifferent. Sea Lily could no longer hold back her tears. She looked at him with hatred in her eyes. Chapter 99. A damp smell, mixed with the stench of fresh blood, began to ferment outside the cell at the end of the corridor. A man and a woman who had been pretending to be affectionate in bed a month ago had long since switched roles. Fan Xian looked at the woman's wretched appearance and frowned slightly. At first, he thought he would be like what was written in the novels of the Ming and Qing dynasties, having a wonderful time with this woman, or perhaps like Bai Letian, taking her home. Who knew that the story would end so hastily before it had even begun? But there was nothing to lament about. Since she wanted to kill him, if he did as Fei Jia had said all those years ago and showed excessive sympathy, it would be extremely irresponsible to himself and the people around him. Meeting those two venomous gazes, Fan Xian explained gently and calmly, I believe that for something like life, if you can control it, you should control it. That is why I gave the poison to you. You should know that your death is of no benefit to me, so there is no need to look at me with such a gaze. I still pity you, but I will not feel guilty. The heads of my 3 guards were smashed into smashed watermelons by your people. Who would feel guilty for their deaths? He waved his hand. Perhaps you don't believe me, but I used to hate the heavens. I thought I had been doing good all my life, but in the end, I received the most wretched ending. If hatred was of any use, I would have long ago punched millions of holes in the heavens. So I later understood that while you still have the ability to control your own body, you must be grateful that you still have a life to live. Sea Lily remained silent. She only gently raised her wounded hands, not letting them come into contact with the coarse grass. Miss C, think about it. Nothing in this world is more important than your own life, Fan Xian said calmly. Fan Xian calmly said, you are a man of Qing, yet you work for Northern Qi. To be able to give up so much, presumably it is not for money, but for revenge or something like that. I don't know if the rumors about you in Jingdo are true, but if you want to do something, you must ensure your own survival. And if you want to live at this time, you must pay a certain price. Sea Lily suddenly raised her head. Although the light in her eyes was dim, it was like the underworld fire in a grave, unwilling to be extinguished. After a long time, she gritted her teeth and said, how can you guarantee that I will live? Fan Xian's spirit rose. He crouched down and said, you just arrived in Jingdo today, and I was able to come to the celestial prison to interrogate you. You should be able to guess my position in the Overwatch Council. Sea Lily shook her head weakly. Do you think I'll believe you? This has nothing to do with belief. Fan Xian gently said, this has always been a gamble. However, right now, you are more passive. Between life and death, you don't have a choice. Sea Lily's gaze wandered helplessly. She seemed to be moved. She turned her face and looked at Fan Xian's clean and beautiful face. For some reason, she thought of that night on the pleasure boat where the two of them were entangled. An unreasonable hatred welled up in her heart. Like a madwoman, she leapt forward and spat at Fan Xian's face. Fan Xian dodged to the side, very surprised. It was clear that this woman's defenses were about to be loosened. Why did she suddenly change her expression? How could he know that whether it was in his previous life or this one, regardless of her occupation, this woman's mind was always like a needle at the bottom of the ocean, like sand in the mountains, hard to touch and hard to fathom. Fan Xian felt a little irritated. His willowy brows furrowed tightly, and his expression kept changing. No one knew what he was thinking. He thought of the general who had committed suicide last night, and then he thought of the one in Wuzhou who was probably already dead. He knew that the other party had acted ruthlessly and quickly. If he wanted to catch the person who truly wanted to deal with him, it seemed that only Sea Lily's mouth could be used. If her confession came out too late, the person who contacted Sea Lily might also die or leave. It seemed that torture wouldn't be enough to break this Northern Chi spy's nerves in a short period of time. Unfortunately, what Fan Xian needed now was time. Even if it took a few days, what was there to be afraid of? It seemed that he wouldn't be able to get anything out of her. Fan Xian seemed a little disappointed. He stood up in front of the bars, as if preparing to leave with Wang Qinian. Suddenly, he took a deep breath, frowned, and stood in front of the cell. He looked coldly at the woman through the bars. Wang Qinian looked at him with some astonishment. Fan Xian's clear voice rang out. "Tell me who did this. I swear on the name of my ancestors in this world that I will definitely let you go." The only reply he got was a deathly silence. But Fan Xian refused to give up. His eyes, which were gradually becoming gentler, looked at Sea Lily's face, and looked at the bloody hands that she held in front of her chest. The damp air in the celestial prison smelled moldy, and the bars and time between Fan Xian and Sea Lily seemed to have grown moldy as well. After an indeterminate amount of time, Sea Lily still bit her lower lip and said nothing. It was clear that deep in her heart, there was some kind of painful struggle going on. The bottle of poison that Fan Xian had thrown to her was made of green porcelain. Now, under her hand, on the hay, it lay quietly. It seemed to emit a very strange smell. After a long time, Fan Xian sighed. It seemed that he had given up. Before he left, he said one last thing to Sea Lily. "The way you raised your hands, you looked like a cute puppy." Later on, Wang Qinian had always felt that Fan Xian was somewhat neurotic. Even under those circumstances, he could still make fun of an enemy spy. Fan Xian himself did not feel this way. At the time, he had said it purely out of instinct. Of course, he did not know what effect his words would have on him immediately, or what it would bring him in the future. Hearing him say that she looked like a cute puppy, Sea Lily was slightly stunned. Contrary to everyone's expectations, the female spy burst into laughter. After laughing, her expression changed. No one knew what she was thinking, but she felt that her spirit was extremely relaxed. It was as if after laughing, all her burdens had been lifted. Her soul began to cower and hide in her body, carefully praying for survival. Her body felt like it was soaking in warm water, it was extremely comfortable, and she began to reminisce about the beauty of life. So she slowly raised her head. Her somewhat pale lips moved slightly, and two words came out. "Mr. Wu." Fan Xian heard clearly that it was Mr. Wu. After a moment of shock, he turned to look at Wang Qinian. Wang Qinian nodded, indicating that he had heard of the name. Only then did Fan Xian let out a sigh of relief. A faint sense of excitement welled up in his heart. He reached into the bars, and under Sea Lily's puzzled gaze, he took the small porcelain bottle of poison from the hay. "Thank you," he said to her, then turned to leave. Sea Lily seemed to understand something. Her blood-covered hands gripped the bars tightly. She cried out to his departing figure, "Don't forget, you swore in the name of your ancestors." After the heavy metal door closed, the Overwatch Council's prison returned to its usual calm and gloomy state. The prisoners here were usually sent to the underworld after only a few days, so there were not many prisoners left. At this moment, the faint sounds of sobbing could be heard from the deepest part of the tunnel. It was very clear and very sad. After a while, the head of the prison respectfully pushed a wheelchair out of the secret room. Chen Pingping was sitting in the wheelchair, resting with his eyes closed. He suddenly opened his eyes and asked, "What do you think of the commissioner I chose?" He was asking about Fan Xian, of course. The head of the prison thought for a moment. Cruel and merciless. He's only half of it. Which half? His hands may be cruel, but he's still a gentle man deep down. Chen Pingping smiled, and a look of gratification appeared on his aged face. That's good, that's good. A gentle heart and a ruthless method is better than a ruthless heart and a rotten method. At least I got the information from Sea Lily by mistake. The head of the prison asked calmly, what should we do with Sea Lily? Chen Pingping thought for a moment, then said lightly, observe for a while. If she can become one of us, then we'll give it a try. If not, then we'll naturally kill her. Don't we need to explain this to Commissioner Fan? I was prepared to hand the council over to him, but since he doesn't have the ability yet, there's no need for him to know too much. Yes, sir, the head of the prison replied. The first bureau is ready to depart. Chen Pingping coughed. At that moment, all the civil and military officials thought he was still in the palace. No one expected him to come alone to the celestial prison. His coughing finally subsided, and he motioned for the head of the prison to push him out. He closed his eyes and thought for a moment. Since Mr. Wu has already forced Fang De to his death, he must have left the capital by now. I'm afraid we won't make it in time. The head of the prison shrugged. He had been in charge of the affairs of the 7th Bureau, and he had always looked down on the efficiency of the 1st Bureau. There was no fun in investigating a case, so he wasn't too concerned about whether or not they could catch Mr. Wu. He just looked at the long corridor above his head and said with a headache, Director, next time don't come and eavesdrop. It's very difficult to move this wheelchair up. Chen Pingping smiled. After leaving the palace today, he had come here to see the son of his old friend. He wanted to see what he looked like now, and whether or not he had the ability to take over everything he had prepared for him. As for the assassination on Nyolan Street, he, like Wu Zhu, did not take it to heart. It was only a small matter. If Fan Xian had died like that, naturally, there would be no need to worry. The more important aspect was to see the special qualities Fan Xian displayed in handling this matter. This was a test. Fan Xian did not know any of this, and hurriedly left the prison with Wang Qinian. He learned from Wang Qinian that Mr. Wu was a famous strategist in the capital, but he always hovered between the second prince and the crown prince. He did not seem to have any clear inclinations, but according to rumors, many things in the bureaucracy were related to the terrifying shadow of this middle-aged man. Fan Xian raised his eyebrows slightly, and his good-looking face became slightly serious. He knew that the man was an old fox, and would certainly want to cut off all the clues. By this time, he might have already learned to live in seclusion in some mountain. The so-called strategist loved to do this sort of thing. After 7 or 8 years, when the matter had died down, he would run out and continue to throw out a bellyful of evil tricks. How can you be sure that what Sea Lily said is true? Wang Qinian asked. Fan Xian calmly replied, it's simple. If that Wu Bowen is still in the capital, then it is not him. If he has already run away, then it is him. It was a very simple judgment, and perhaps the closest to the truth. There were too many things in this world that were complicated by the stupidity of human beings. Wang Qinian nervously asked, then are we really going to let Sea Lily go? Sir, you don't have that kind of authority right now, but before. Although the people of the Overwatch Council did not respect ghosts or gods, they had great respect for the existence of their ancestors. Fan Xian did not answer him. He only thought to himself that his ancestors in this world did not seem to have much to do with him. He knew that it was not a good time for him to make an appearance, so he had Wang Qinian inform the First Bureau. Mu Tai knew who Fan Xian was, and should believe what Wang Qinian said. When the two of them parted, Fan Xian discreetly nodded at a dark corner of the street, confirming the name Wu Bowen with that person. After making these arrangements, Fan Xian slowly returned to Fan Manor. He climbed over the wall and quietly lay on his bed, waiting for the news the next day. When Wang Qinian entered the Overwatch Council, he was surprised to find that his colleagues in the First Bureau were all ready to go. He couldn't help but be surprised. Mu Tai looked at him and smiled. That night, there was nothing to do in the capital. After Fan Xian returned to Fan Manor, he greeted everyone and then entered a secret room he had requested from his father. He carefully took out a small, well-sealed leather pouch and poured out the small blue porcelain bottle. The bottle was made of green sand, and its opening was larger than that of ordinary porcelain, so it could contain a faint fragrance. Fan Xian had spent a lot of effort to make Sea Lily lower her guard. He took out a clay jar from the corner of the wall and opened the lid. A wave of fragrance assaulted his face, almost making him dizzy. He put the small blue porcelain bottle back into the jar and returned to his bedroom. His legs were wrapped in a thin silk quilt, and he fell asleep uneasily. The next day, Wang Qinian came to report with some shame. He said that Wu Bowen had long since left the capital. He had expected this, so he was not disappointed. About 18 miles away from the capital, there was a manor. In the distance, the snowy peaks of the Tsang Mountains could be seen. Even though it was early summer, the manor was still very cool. The grape trellis had already sprouted its leaves, and the scenery was pleasing to the eye. Wu Bowen, whom Fan Xian had painstakingly interrogated, was now sitting leisurely on the grape trellis. He looked at the young man in front of him and said with a hint of reproach, "You shouldn't have come." The young man in front of him was the second son of the Prime Minister, Lin Gong. He looked at Wu Bowen and said politely, "Mr. Wu is being forced to leave the capital. Naturally, I have to come and see you off." Chapter 100. Wu Bowen smiled. He believed that he had everything under control, and that everything was within his calculations. People always thought that he was swinging between the second prince and the crown prince, but they didn't know about his relationship with the prime minister. "It's too risky," he said reproachfully. "The prime minister doesn't know about our plan. If he were to find out, I'm afraid that even your father would have a hard time getting out." Lin Gong smiled sinisterly. "You should go to Mount Lao to meditate for a while. When the capital makes a fuss, the crown prince will know that he has to rely on the Lin family in order to rule the world." "That's right." Wu Bowen looked worried. Ever since the news of the young lady's marriage, the empress has become much colder. I don't know if it's because the eldest princess can no longer control the palace treasury. From the incident of the prime minister's illegitimate daughter at the beginning of the year to the marriage appointment, Wu Bowen felt that His Majesty had been trying to humiliate the prime minister, perhaps in preparation for the crown prince's future succession. As expected, the crown prince began to drift away from the prime minister's manor. So he secretly planned this plan. Not only could he kill Fan Xian and temporarily stabilize the situation in the palace treasury, but he could also make the crown prince fall into an unstable environment of rumors, forcing the Eastern Palace to re-establish a close relationship with the prime minister's manor. But from the beginning, the prime minister had been strictly against this plan, but the second prince had been very enthusiastic. A young master and a strategist began to secretly manipulate these matters, using the name of the prime minister to move the Fong brothers, who had been hiding in the army for a long time. But Wu Bowen had never expected that Fan Xian would be able to escape such a terrifying attack, and even kill the 8th level ace, leaving behind an unerasable trace. But the situation was still under control. General Fong had been silenced. Even if the Overwatch Council found out that he was the mastermind, they wouldn't be able to trace it back to the prime minister. So Wu Bowen told the second prince, Lin Gong, to hurry back to the capital. Lin Gong smiled proudly. "I've been managing this manor for a long time. Even if the palace guards or the Overwatch Council came, it would be extremely difficult for them to come in and capture anyone. Furthermore, we've been so secretive. Who would know that we were here?" Wu Bowen thought for a moment, and it was indeed so. After he relaxed, the inescapable air of a famous scholar appeared again. He waved his paper fan at the grape trellis above his head and said with a smile, "This grape trellis is very elegant, but it reminds me of a joke." What joke? There was an official who was henpecked. One day, his face was scratched by his wife. The next day, the governor asked him what was going on. The official replied awkwardly, saying that he was enjoying the shade under the grape trellis last night, but the trellis unexpectedly fell and scratched his face. The governor was furious and shouted, "This must have been done by your family's shrew. How dare you? Quickly summon the bailiffs to bring your wife here." At this moment, no one expected that the governor's wife was eavesdropping from the back of the court. In a rage, she rushed into the court and berated the governor. The governor panicked and hurriedly said to the official, "You can leave first. My house's grape trellis has also collapsed." After telling the joke, the two of them burst into laughter. The second son, Lin Gong, had naturally heard this joke before. However, he understood the meaning behind it. Was Mr. Wu implying that his father was henpecked? But his mother died early. Could it be that the Prime Minister was afraid of the eldest princess? Lin Gong was a little angry. Just then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a black shadow appear in the garden. It was a blind man with a piece of black cloth covering his eyes. In his hand was an iron drill with blood slowly dripping from its tip. Lin Gong and Wu Zhu stood up abruptly. They knew that this person had snuck in without a sound, and that all the experts outside must have died to this iron drill. Thinking of how none of the experts in the manor had even cried out before they died, Lin Gong felt a chill in his heart. He shouted in fear, "Who are you? Let's talk." Wu Zhu didn't answer him. Like a ghost, he rushed over from the other end of the garden. Lin Gong roared, unsheathed the flexible sword at his waist, and swung it down. Wu Zhu leaned to the side, dodging the tip of the sword. His whole body was pressed against Lin Gong's face. The two of them were very close, and it looked somewhat strange. There was a splat. Fresh blood dripped from the iron drill sticking out of Lin Gong's back. He looked at the black cloth in front of him, his eyes full of fear and disbelief. He was the son of the Prime Minister, and this person didn't even give him a chance to speak before killing him. The iron drill had already pierced through Lin Gong's chest, and then Wu Zhu's whole body was pressed against it. Lin Gong's body slid back a few inches on the iron drill. It was a terrifying sight. With a ripping sound, Wu Zhu calmly pulled the iron drill out of Lin Gong's body. He seemed to be moving very slowly, but in reality, he was quickly moving 3 steps to the side, avoiding the fountain of blood spurting from Lin Gong's chest. The iron drill pierced right through Lin Gong's heart. Blood sprayed out from the small hole. It was a very beautiful sight. Seeing this bloody scene, Wu Bo-an's face was deathly pale, but he tightly covered his mouth, not allowing himself to make the slightest sound. He saw the black cloth covering his opponent's eyes, and knew that he was blind. He was trying to bluff his way through. Wu Zhu tilted his head slightly, turning around to look at him. Wu Bo-an's heart surged with intense despair, but a trace of a bitter smile appeared on his face. He tried to make his voice as steady as possible. "I am not one of the Prime Minister's men." This warrior knew that selling his life to others was not necessarily a promising thing. "I am Wu Bo-an, and I have a wide circle of friends in the capital. If you still have your ambitions, why not?" His voice stopped abruptly, and he looked down with difficulty at the iron drill that had already pierced through his throat. He did not understand why this assassin would not want to hear him out. He was a weak scholar, not a threat. Besides, he considered himself not only a strategist, but also a peerless orator. If this blind assassin was willing to hear him out, he would not kill him. He still had many important things to do in his life. How could he die like this? But the strategist Wu Bo-an had died so easily. Wu Zhu had lived in this world for more than 30 years, but he had never understood why, whether it was in Dongyi, Northern Wei, the capital, or here, every time he was about to kill someone, these people always liked to talk incessantly. The young lady had once said, "Swords are always more powerful than words." Wuxia had always thought he understood the meaning of these words, but he did not understand why the people of the world did not understand this principle. Wuxia put away the iron drill and walked out of the garden, a little lonely. After he left, the grape rack finally could no longer withstand the murderous aura of Wuxia's quick movements. With a crack, it fell over the two corpses. The green leaves covered them, and the old vines were entwined together. For the next few days, there was no other news from the Overwatch Council. Mu Tai had come to Fan Manor once to flatter him, but Wu Bo-an, who was not famous, but was actually a very powerful strategist, had suddenly disappeared. Fan Xian did not seem to be in a good mood, so when Mu Tai's hand landed lightly on his leg, he did not leave a good impression. Count Sinan's secret agents also quietly joined the search party, but they still came up empty-handed. When Wang Qinian reported the failure of the operation, Fan Xian had no choice but to put the matter aside for the time being. He forced his thoughts to focus on his sister, the bookstore, and the chicken leg. He patiently waited for Uncle Blackcloth's next move. That afternoon, he forced himself to take his sister and Xia to King Jing's manor. Unexpectedly, King Jing was not there. Crown Prince Li Hongqing said helplessly, "Father, my son went to the palace today. He said the Empress Dowager missed him." Fan Xian laughed and did not think too much about the matter. He and Li Hongqing went to the back garden under the pergola, eating some fruits and chatting to avoid the heat of early summer. None of them were outsiders, so the prince's youngest daughter, Princess Wuxia, who Fan Xian had once been very interested in, was also there, and did not avoid anything. Fan Xian looked at the girl and could not help but feel a lingering fear. When he had heard Ruoruo talk about the story of the stone, he had wondered if the princess would develop some sort of affection for him after finding out that he was the author of the story of the stone. But after seeing Wuxia, Fan Xian immediately dismissed that thought. The princess was very beautiful. Her little face was rosy, and she was also very gentle and polite. In fact, she was the most gentle woman Fan Xian had ever seen since he came to this world. But Fan Xian still resolutely turned his nose to the sky, and did not look at her in the slightest. This was because this princess had just turned 12 this year, and was an incomparably pure and unripe fruit. She could not even be considered a young girl. Fan Xian was a man of many emotions, but he was not a promiscuous person. Whenever he thought of doing something with a 12-year-old girl, he felt a pang of fear, and tried to avoid it. Who would have thought that his worst fears would come true? Princess Wuxia had been sitting obediently by Ruoruo's side the entire time. Her eyes, intentionally or unintentionally, had been glancing at Fan Xian. Her large eyes flashed shyly, and Fan Xian's heart raced, flustered, confused, and afraid. Fan Xia was led away by the servants of the manor to shoot arrows. Fan Xian and the crown prince were chatting casually, and the two girls were also quietly talking about something. Just as Fan Xian was feeling awkward, he suddenly saw one of the manor's subordinates rush in and whisper something into Li Hongqing's ear. Li Hongqing's expression changed, and he looked at Fan Xian with a puzzled expression. "What's happened?" Fan Xian looked at the awning and smiled. "The prince's grape trellises are very well built, but it reminds me of a joke." The crown prince did not give him a chance to show off his little talent in front of the girls. With a serious expression, he pulled him aside and quietly said, "Something has happened." Chapter 101. What is it? Fan Xian knew that it was not a simple matter, otherwise Li Hongqing would not be so nervous. But he still forced a smile. "As long as your grape trellis is intact." Strangely enough, Li Hongqing had long since reached marriageable age, but for some reason, he had never taken a wife. "I don't have time to joke with you." Li Hongqing's face darkened. "Yesterday, there was a murder in a manor at the foot of the Tsang Mountains. Wu Bo-en and the second son of the Prime Minister, Lin Gong, were both killed. Fan Xian turned pale with fright. What? Li Hongqing said, yes, your future brother-in-law is dead. Fan Xian had not thought about the complicated relationship between relatives. He was a little shocked. Wu Bo-en's death was within his expectations, but, if it was not his uncle who did it, and someone was trying to silence him, how could the second son of the Prime Minister be involved? Fan Xian was aware of this. His net worth was still far below that of his second brother-in-law. Since Wu Bo-en and his future brother-in-law had died together, could it be that the person who wanted to kill him was the Prime Minister's father-in-law? He had no feelings for this brother-in-law he had never met, but thinking about what had happened, he could not help but feel a little distressed. After calming down a little, he asked, how did they die? Li Hongqing described the scene of the discovery to him. Given the remoteness of the manor, it would have taken a long time for the murder to be discovered. He hadn't expected that the third day would coincide with the announcement of the mountain order. As soon as he entered the manor, he saw the corpses strewn all over the ground. In his shock, he reported it to the higher-ups. Because the dead were the Prime Minister's son and Wu Bo-en, who had a special status, the news passed through the capital government and the Ministry of Justice directly to the palace. King Jing entered the palace that day and heard the news, so he asked a eunuch he was familiar with to send word back. Fan Xian's heart skipped a beat. King Jing must have known that he would be visiting the manor today, so he took the risk to send word back. It seemed that he wanted to inform Fan Xian. But why did he think Fan Xian needed this information? Seeing his expression, Li Hongqing lowered his voice and said, the Overwatch Council is looking for Wu Bo-en. I heard it had something to do with the assassination attempt on you last time. His death was so strange this time. Be careful not to arouse suspicion. Fan Xian pretended to be shocked and waved his hands. This has nothing to do with me. Even the Overwatch Council can't find him. How can I find him? If the Prime Minister really believes this, how can I live in the capital? Li Hongqing saw that he did not seem to be faking it. He breathed a sigh of relief. If you really did it, I will have to reevaluate your power. I will have to please you in the future. By now, Fan Xian was quite familiar with him. He laughed and scolded, what kind of shameful statement is that? I only hope that the Prime Minister will not link his son's death to me, or I will have to thank the gods. Li Hongqing said, I don't think so. Your explanation just now was very convincing. If Sir Chen couldn't catch someone, then it's even more impossible for you to catch him when you've just entered the capital. Even if you did catch him, you wouldn't just kill him to vent your anger. He looked at Fan Xian and said seriously, I believe you. I will speak to my father on your behalf. I believe that the Prime Minister will not act rashly. Fan Xian sighed. I'm afraid that the Prime Minister will first have to find a way to explain why the second young master was with Wu Bo-en. You should know that Wu Bo-en is connected to spies from Northern Qi. His crime of treason is already established. Li Hongqing nodded and said worriedly, it's just that the Prime Minister has lost his son in his old age. If his political enemies use Wu Bo-en's matter to attack him, I'm afraid his days will not be easy. Fan Xian stole a glance at the Crown Prince. Aren't you and the second prince the Prime Minister's political enemies? Why do you have to make it sound so indifferent? After leaving King Jing's manor and getting into the carriage, Fan Ruoruo noticed that her brother's expression was not right. She asked with concern, are you not feeling well? Or did you get sunburned too much earlier? Fan Xizha joined in and sat down, fawningly handing Fan Xian his folding fan. Fan Xian was a little uneasy, so he was a little irritated. He said impatiently, I'm fine. After saying it, he realized that there was something wrong with his tone. He smiled bitterly and explained, there are some troublesome matters that I need to think about. Don't worry about me for now. After entering Fan Manor, the first thing Fan Xian did was run to his father's study. He found that his father was not at home. Perhaps he had been summoned to the palace. Somewhat uneasy, he returned to his room. When he sat down at the table, he realized that his back was drenched in sweat. In fact, when Li Hongqing described the deaths of Wu Boan and the Prime Minister's second son, Fan Xian already knew who had done it. In this world, no one was more familiar with Wu Zhu's methods and the traces he left behind. That night, when Fan Xian found out the name Wu Boan in the imperial prison, he knew that Wu Boan was already a dead man, but he did not expect that Lin Wan's second brother would also die. Although he did not know how Wu Zhu had found Mr. Wu, given Wu Zhu's cold and indifferent personality, it was quite normal for him to kill two people behind the scenes who had plotted against Fan Xian. Wu Zhu was a grandmaster. In his eyes, perhaps the son of the prime minister was just like the assassin who had come to kill him in Danzhou, flesh and blood. As long as it did not implicate Fan Xian, Wu Zhu's iron rod was not a taboo. Fan Xian was uneasy. If even King Jing believed that he had something to do with Lin Gong's death, what would the prime minister think? He wanted to avenge the death of his bodyguard and the serious injuries he and Teng Zijing had suffered. He had also thought that the mastermind behind the scenes might be the prime minister, his future father-in-law. If that was the case, Fan Xian thought that he would kill Wu Boan as a warning. But he did not expect that Lin Wan's second brother would die so cleanly. The Lin family only had two sons, and he heard that the eldest had some problems. Thinking of Lin Wan gave Fan Xian another headache. Even if Wan had grown up in the palace and had no feelings for the Lin family, they were still related by blood. This was a fact that could not be denied. He stood up and walked around the table twice. His eyes gradually became determined. He decided that for the rest of his life, he would never let Wan know about this. He could not let her know that it was his uncle who killed her brother. In the depths of the incomparably dignified palace, the room of the most powerful man in the world was far less imposing than the territory he governed. The incense in the cauldron gradually dispersed, leaving behind only a thick layer of incense ash. Outside the door, the sun shone in from the west, and the willows that came rushing over the threshold could be counted in the light. The room was paved with light-colored bricks, and on its left and right stood a dozen or so high-ranking officials of the court. Today was not a formal court meeting, so this was not Taiji Palace, but a side hall. The great emperor of Qing did not sit on the high dragon throne, but chose a chair at random to sit on. Today, the emperor wore a water-blue silk casual robe, with a golden ribbon with a coiled dragon tied around his waist. His jet-black hair was tied up tightly, and only a few strands of silver could be seen at his temples. He sat casually on the chair, lower than the officials standing around him, but his aura made him seem like he was sitting at the highest point of the world, looking down on the millions of subjects beneath his feet. Today, the affairs of the state had come to an end. Only a few old and important officials remained in the room. Chen Pingping sat first on the left. Because he was in a wheelchair, he looked very special. His head drooped listlessly, as if he was about to fall asleep. These officials knew that as the emperor's most trusted aide, Director Chen, he had received an edict that he did not need to attend the regular court meetings. But today's meeting was something he had to attend. Prime Minister Lin Ruofu sat first on the right. Today, he also had special treatment. He sat on a round stool, but his official robe was a bit long, so he looked a bit comical. This world-famous treacherous man was born with delicate features and his eyes were bright and full of expression. Only his slightly white beard revealed his true age. It could be assumed that when he was young, he must have been a handsome man. Today, his eyes were a bit red and swollen, and his lips were a bit white. Presumably, he had been crying earlier. "My condolences, Prime Minister," the Emperor said softly. The room buzzed with echoes. "You should rest in the manor for a few days. It's also good," to send that child off. Lin Ruofu stood up and bowed respectfully. Choking with sobs, he said, "I dare not. It is already a sin to disturb your majesty regarding my son's matter." The other officials also warmly tried to persuade the old prime minister. The dead could not be brought back to life, and so on and so on. Lin Ruofu suddenly said in a loud voice, "Dare I ask your majesty to uphold justice for me, and seek justice for that dead child?" Having said this, he knelt down. That afternoon, he had learned of his second son's death. The prime minister, who had always had a heart of stone, almost fainted. As the saying goes, the old send off the young. How could he withstand such an emotional blow? The emperor's lips curled up without anyone noticing. But no one dared to stare at the emperor's face, so no one noticed this small detail. His Majesty seemed to be a bit surprised by the prime minister's words. Since the attack on Fan Xian's son 2 days ago, another murder has unexpectedly occurred in the capital. Naturally, the capital government cannot escape responsibility. Do not worry, Prime Minister. I will punish them heavily to give you an explanation. Each department must seize the opportunity to apprehend the culprit, with the Ministry of Justice taking the lead. If there is any disagreement, Director Chen will take command. Chen Pingping seemed to be sleeping soundly, but now he opened his eyes and smiled. Lin Ruofu's eyes shone brightly, but it only lasted for a moment. He kowtowed to the emperor, and under the persuasion of the others, stood up. The emperor looked at him calmly. The kingdom of Qing did not pay much attention to etiquette, and the emperor knew that the prime minister's head was not easy to bear. He suddenly frowned and said, "In the previous incident, there was the shadow of northern Qi. They intended to cause a disturbance in the royal court. Could it be that this time, it is another foreign thief? Has the forbidden land fallen to such a state? Send down an edict. Have the 3 departments in the north conduct a thorough investigation." He suddenly reprimanded him sternly. "Chen Pingping, you need to put some effort into the affairs of the council. Do you think the 4th Bureau does nothing? This time, you went back to visit your relatives, and it dragged on for an extra month. Do you want the children of the officials in the court to die before you are willing to come back?" The emperor's anger silenced the entire hall. Chapter 102. Hearing His Majesty's voice grow louder and louder, the officials were alarmed. It was rare to see His Majesty so angry, and even rarer to reprimand Chen Pingping. Chen Pingping's expression did not change. "On my way back to the capital, someone in the court tried to kidnap the spy from northern Qi, Si Lily. Si Lily is related to the assassination attempt on the son of the Fan family. This is a serious matter, and after receiving the report, I took a detour to escort the spy back. That's why I was delayed for some time." "Ah, so that's how it is. That's all." The emperor softly grunted. He had raised the matter high and then lightly let it fall. The ministers were initially shocked, thinking that His Majesty didn't seem to like even Chen Darren very much. Then, they realized that the matter of returning late was, in the end, improper, and His Majesty was using this matter to settle this debt. But then they remembered what Chen Pingping had said about Si Lily. This was the first time the officials had heard of someone trying to break a prisoner out, and they couldn't help but be shocked. They wondered if there really was a high-ranking official colluding with Northern Qi to confuse the court. Put the matter of Si Lily aside for now. First, investigate the case of the son of the Prime Minister. The emperor looked at Chen Pingping coldly. Chen Pingping straightened in his wheelchair and looked at Lin Ruofu again. He smiled. "These 2 cases are actually one." "What do you mean?" Not only the emperor, but the other officials were also interested. Only Lin Ruofu seemed to have thought of something, and his expression became very unsightly. The Prime Minister was worried about the death of his son. "There are some things I shouldn't say, but as an official, I dare not hide anything from His Majesty. Please forgive me for speaking out of turn. The emperor frowned. Let's hear it. Chen Pingping clenched his withered hand into a fist and covered his mouth with blue veins. He coughed a few times, as if coughing up all the phlegm in his chest. When the second son of the Prime Minister, Lin Gong, was killed, he was with Wu Bowen. Who is this Wu Bowen? The emperor frowned. Speak clearly. Most of the officials in the room knew of Wu Bowen's reputation in the capital's officialdom. However, they had always thought that this strategist was swinging between the crown prince and the second prince. Who would have thought that he was with the son of the prime minister? Now that they looked at the prime minister again, they couldn't help but feel a little worried. After all, they were all civil servants. If Wu Bowen was bitten by the mad dog Wu Bowen, they would all lose face. At this time, Lin Ruofu was sitting on a round stool. His eyes were still red and swollen, but he didn't seem to be worried. A few days ago, I investigated the assassination attempt on Fan Xian's son. Si Lily confessed that the person who contacted Northern Qi was Wu Bowen, and that the person who let the Western barbarian archers into the capital was General Fong Darren of the city patrol. The leader of the cavalry outside Cangzhou who attempted to break out the prisoners was a subordinate of Fong Darren's distant cousin, General Xiao of Wuzhou. Now, it seems that the mastermind of this incident was Wu Bowen. Fong Xiao and Fong Darren were both executors, responsible for receiving the Northern Qi assassins and silencing them. As for the matter of the archers' bodies being cremated first, there are currently no clues. What are you trying to say? I don't mean anything else. I'm just curious as to why the second young master of Lin Ruofu would be in the manor at the foot of Tsang Mountain with the mastermind behind the assassination attempt on Fan Xian's son. Hearing this, the officials were in an uproar. Guo Yu, the Minister of Rights, was the first to defend the Prime Minister. Let's not talk about whether Si Lily could not stand the torture and made a wild accusation. Even if Wu Bowen had something to do with the previous case. He turned to the emperor and apologized. Your Majesty, please don't blame me. It was because Wu Bowen was a scholar 20 years ago. He was famous in the capital and had a wide circle of friends. It was normal for the second young master of Lin Ruofu to be in the same place as him. How could you slander the deceased because of this? The Prime Minister's pain of losing his son has not yet subsided, and yet Chen Fan is spouting such nonsense. It is really unbearable. Unbearable. Lin Ruofu stood up and bowed to the emperor. My son was unfilial, he said in a pained voice. He acted rashly and met with misfortune. But if you say he had such a disloyal heart, I absolutely do not believe it. He continued, I have also met Wu Bowen. He is indeed a talented man. I have also traveled with him to the famous sites around the capital. If he was acquainted with Wu Bowen, then it would be related to the murder case. Wouldn't I be unable to escape the suspicion? Correct. An official also shook his head. I have also met Wu Bowen. Looking at his face, he seems quite upright. If he really is a cruel and unscrupulous person, then what does it have to do with the second young master of Lin Ruofu? You should be careful with what you say. Lin Ruofu's face was filled with emotion. If I have anything to do with this matter, then the heavens will hate me, the heavens will hate me. Hearing the Prime Minister's heavy words, the officials knelt down with him. Seeing the officials kneeling, the emperor rested his chin on his hand and glanced at Chen Pingping. His eyes were full of smiles. In the blink of an eye, the emperor's face turned frosty. He motioned for the officials to rise and sternly said, Chen Pingping has already apologized. He has not finished yet. Allow him to continue. It was always like this in the court. Chen Pingping dominated the court, and the civil officials always liked to group together. Chen Pingping glanced at Lin Ruofu and said, "Prime Minister, please calm your anger. I just feel puzzled." The Overwatch Council searched the capital for a day and a night, but they still could not find Wu Bo-an. Yet the young master was able to drink and chat with this strategist under the grape trellis. "Naturally, I want to understand. Whether or not Wu Bo-an was the mastermind behind the previous case is still unknown. Perhaps he and the second young master of Lin Ruofu had arranged to go to the Tsang Mountains to enjoy the scenery. Chen Pingping, we will discuss this matter later." The emperor suddenly spoke coldly, stopping Chen Pingping's statement. Seeing that the emperor was on their side, the officials let out a sigh of relief. But Lin Ruofu's heart was struck by the words, "discuss later." A wave of coldness welled up in his heart. He knew that the emperor was warning him not to make a fuss. This was a kind of exchange, one that did not require the aid of words, but was understood by both sides. Lin Ruofu trusted Yuan Hongdao's judgment. Gong Er's death had nothing to do with the Fan family, so he remained silent and accepted the truth. After all, if the Overwatch Council pursued the matter of Wu Bo-an's collusion with Northern Qi, it would be considered treason, and he feared that he would lose his position as Prime Minister. "Earlier, you said that these two cases were one. What do you mean by that?" Chen Pingping looked at the officials with an expressionless face. The officials were afraid of the cold look in his eyes and coughed uncomfortably. He said quietly, "After the Ministry of Justice and the Council examined the wounds of the deceased and the scene at the time, they determined that the culprit was Siga Jian from Dongyi City. Therefore, I concluded that the two cases were one." Hearing the words Siga Jian, even the officials who did not know martial arts were moved. It was no wonder that when they recounted the attack on the Tsang Mountain Manor, they heard that there was only one culprit, yet he was able to silently kill a dozen masters, and each one was fatal. Only Lin Ruofu's expression did not change, as if he had known about this a long time ago. The emperor furrowed his brows. Although he did not care about the four great grandmasters, these transcendent martial arts experts were an existence that was difficult for the dignity of the imperial court to tolerate. Because a few days ago, among the assassins killed by the Fan clan's son, there were two female assassins. According to the council's records, these two female assassins should have been under the tutelage of Siga Jian from Dongyi City, but we do not know if they were his disciples or grand-disciples. A month ago, there were reports from the council that Siga Jian was not in Dongyi City. In my opinion, the sword fanatic should have come to Qing. The emperor slowly closed his eyes and asked coldly, why did he not kill the Fan clan's children, but instead find Wu Bo-an? Everyone knows that Siga Jian is a sword fanatic. When his disciples assassinated someone else and were killed in retaliation, he would probably admire the other party's methods and would not view them as enemies. Furthermore, this person loathed schemes and plots and strictly forbade his disciples from involving themselves in the struggles of the country. If Wu Bo-an had not promised some benefits and persuaded the two female assassins, they would not have died. I'm afraid that in his heart, only Wu Bo-an is his true enemy. Chen Pingping spoke lightly. He lied without batting an eyelid. After a long time, the emperor's dignified voice rang out in the palace. The capital's magistrate, Mei Zhili, pleads guilty. His salary will be reduced for a year. The Overwatch Council will be stationed in the City Patrol Division to investigate, and Zhao Ziheng will be relieved of his duties. The Ministry of Justice will continue to investigate 2 additional murder cases. After the cases are concluded, an edict will be issued to Dongyi City to hand over the culprit. Having said this, he went up to Lin Ruofu and said a few words of comfort, then left the room. The officials retreated, and a serving girl came forward to push Chen Pingping's wheelchair into the inner palace. The officials were not surprised by this. They had never imagined that they would one day receive such favor from Chen Pingping. That was why they were so tightly united in all matters, big or small. Fighting against the power of the Overwatch Council was the same as fighting against the emperor's personal power. This was the traditional concept of the civil officials since the founding of the Qing kingdom. It seemed to have been deeply ingrained in their heads and could never be shaken off. The officials even thought maliciously that perhaps it was because Chen Pingping was paralyzed and had no children that the emperor trusted him so unreservedly. In the quiet depths of the palace, there were no eunuchs or serving girls. Only the emperor and Chen Pingping sat facing each other. The emperor raised his teacup and took a sip. He seemed to feel that the temperature of the tea was not quite right. He frowned and smashed the cup in front of Chen Pingping's wheelchair. Crack! The porcelain cup shattered into pieces, and the tea soaked the bottom of Chen Pingping's trousers. His legs were not good, and he could not avoid it. Different from before, the emperor's voice was particularly cold and oppressive. Sigurjian? This answer is a bit preposterous. It was as if Chen Pingping did not see the scene in front of him. With a face full of smiles, he replied respectfully, "I dare not hide this from you, your majesty." That wound was mournful and had a sense of loss. The Ministry of Justice and the Council all agreed on this. The emperor curled the corners of his lips and looked at him with a smile. Suddenly, a strange light flashed through his eyes. He asked in a loud voice, "Is Lao Wu in the capital?" Chen Pingping slowly raised his head and opened his lips. A moment later, he said, "Correct. Sir Wu is currently in Jingdo." The emperor seemed a bit tired. He rubbed the space between his brows and lightly said, "Just how many things are you hiding from me?" He then sighed and said, "Never mind. Since you even dare to hide the couplet, then you must hide it from the people under heaven. Don't let those people know of Lao Wu's existence." Chapter 103. "Yes, sir," Chen Pingping answered respectfully. "Were those two female assassins really Sigurjian's disciples?" "Yes." The emperor suddenly furrowed his brows and asked, "Would Sigurjian really not kill the Fan family's son for revenge?" Chen Pingping answered respectfully, "A grandmaster will always have some heirs. He is still training in the Dongyi sword pit. As long as Fan Xian does not go to Dongyi, it will be fine. I am also handling this matter." "I know. We didn't finish talking about it the night before yesterday. We will continue today." The emperor half closed his eyes to rest. "It took you so long to return to the capital. Even if you are not afraid of the censor's complaints, I still have to consider the opinions of the people. I know you are throwing a tantrum and are not satisfied with the arrangements you have made for him." Chen Pingping gently rubbed the fingernail of his right hand's ring finger. It was unclear whether he was nervous or excited, but his wrinkled face remained calm. "After this matter, I reckon the Prime Minister will bear a grudge. Although he will believe that it was Sigurjian who did it, he will always believe that his son died because of Lady Fan. This marriage. I think we should forget about it." The emperor calmly said, "It doesn't matter. King Jing has already entered the palace. For some reason, he likes that kid very much. Don't be fooled by his indifference. If he really wants to protect someone, no one in the court would dare to touch him. As for Lin Ruofu, he is a smart man. After Lin Gong's death, who should he trust? 20 years later, he should make a truly smart decision. King Jing?" Chen Pingping was a little surprised. Of course, he did not recognize him, so I do not know where his affection for that kid came from. The emperor sighed. Perhaps it is all fate. It seemed that these words touched on some old pain. The emperor and the official fell silent at the same time. Chen Pingping suddenly said, "I opposed this marriage 4 years ago. Today, I still oppose this marriage." The emperor opened his eyes and looked at him. "You are younger than me, but you have worked hard all these years and have aged a lot. In the future, you should worry less about these things. The matters of these little fellows are not qualified for you to worry about them. Chen Pingping smiled. When this is over, I will retire. What is it? Your Majesty, about that child. The emperor's tone became indifferent. In order to leave his mother's things to him, I went through many twists and turns. I pretended to feel sorry for Chen, made her a princess, and used this property as her dowry. Then, I asked the Empress Dowager to appoint a marriage. Only then did I give him these things. I have put in a lot of effort. Could it be that you are still dissatisfied? I wouldn't dare. Chen Pingping knew that in order for Fan Xian to be able to regain control of the Yi family, the emperor had used many methods. He said seriously, however, I have always wondered how the Overwatch Council would be dealt with if one day I passed away. If the council was handed over to an outsider, it would be a very dangerous matter. Unlike the succession of imperial power, the Overwatch Council was a somewhat abnormal existence. It was completely dependent on the emperor's unparalleled trust in Chen Pingping and Chen Pingping's unparalleled loyalty to the emperor. If Chen Pingping died, no matter who took over the Overwatch Council, it could have an unimaginably terrifying effect on the Qing court. If it was handed over to an official, there could be a powerful official who could threaten the royal family. If it was handed over to a prince, there could be an overly powerful prince who could affect the succession of the throne. The emperor closed his eyes again, as if thinking about something. You think I should hand the council over to him? Correct. Since that child is not an outsider, he will not threaten the palace. But his background means that he cannot participate in the struggle of the emperor's family, so he can maintain a neutral position, Chen Pingping replied slowly. The emperor seemed to be moved. Let me think about it. Take good care of your body. You still have 10 or 20 years to live. There is no need to rush this matter. Yes. Chen Pingping saw that today's goal had been achieved. He respectfully bowed and retreated. A palace maid saw him from afar and came to help him walk out of the palace. The emperor stood up and closed his eyes for a long time. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and watched the wheelchair walk out of the palace. He had never doubted Chen Pingping's loyalty to him, but he had always wondered why this old dog was so obsessed with that woman. He was willing to do anything to fight for all the power he could get for that child. Thinking of that child, a trace of gentleness suddenly flashed across the face of this world's ruler. He thought to himself, I haven't seen him since coming to the capital. The palace maid pushed the wheelchair into the inner palace. A guard took it and slowly pushed it into the outer palace. When it reached the palace gates, people from the Overwatch Council took it and helped old Sir Chen into the carriage. The carriage moved forward on Zhuke Avenue, rolling over the stone pavement and making a rhythmic sound. It had been a long time, but they still hadn't left the inner city. The road to the east of the city was very quiet. At this time, the sky was half dark. The carriage turned diagonally and stopped in a secluded place. There, another carriage was already waiting. The officials from the Overwatch Council and the guards next to the carriage didn't seem to be familiar with each other, but they tacitly left the carriage at the same time and scattered around, forming a relatively hidden defensive circle. The two carriages were very close to each other. At the same time, the people in the carriage opened the side curtain and looked at each other. It was Chen Pingping and Fan Xian's father, Fan Jian, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. Chen Pingping looked at this righteous face and was very angry. While I was not in the capital, you coaxed His Majesty into finding a good marriage for your son. Fan Jian saw that he was angry, but he was neither afraid nor nervous. He smiled and replied, 4 years ago, you ruined my plans. I'm just trying to make things right. Chen Pingping coldly said, what's there to be happy about with such a pile of stinking money? Fan Jian shook his head. Money is the most important thing. Don't forget that when the council was first built, if it weren't for Xian's mother, you would be starving. The palace treasury of today is no longer the Yi family of the past. If the Fan family were to take over, I'm afraid they would be badly battered. His Majesty forced the Lin family to acknowledge an illegitimate daughter so that you and the Prime Minister could live in peace. At the same time, it was also for the future. Otherwise, if people found out that a princess was married to a prince, what would they say? Chen Pingping laughed coldly. Listen to my advice. Annul this marriage. It will be a good thing for both of you. You think I don't know what you're planning? Fan Jian frowned. You've always believed that the eldest princess had something to do with what happened back then. But after all these years, you still haven't found any evidence. That's not the only reason. Chen Pingping's face was cold. Even if His Majesty feels that he owes him, think about it. If His Majesty really did listen to you and return the Yi family to him, what would happen to the council? His Majesty is a great strategist. He would never allow anyone in the world to wield these two national weapons at the same time. Not even him. Fan Jian's frown deepened. If you know all this, then why did you involve my son in this matter? Wouldn't it be better for him to be a rich man? Is it that easy to be a rich man? With you and me in the capital, and the eldest princess having been taught a lesson, the next few years should be very peaceful. Chen Pingping's voice was cold. Don't forget, your son was almost killed a month ago. Fan Jian stared into his eyes. That was my negligence, but it was also your fault. If you hadn't been so angry and refused to return, then there wouldn't have been so much trouble in the capital. Chen Pingping calmly said, if your son had died just like that, would you and I still need to put in so much effort? After a moment of silence, Fan Jian spoke. In this matter, I have paid a far greater price than you. So if you can't make a choice, I hope you will respect my opinion. Chen Pingping thought for a moment, then agreed with what Fan Jian had said. Fan Jian coldly let down the curtain and gave the order. The two carriages went their separate ways. Darkness enveloped the imperial city. In this ink-like background, some people gathered for the sake of benefits, and some gathered for the sake of ideals. Then, they would often separate because of the same two words, waiting for some day or some coincidental reason to come together again. At the foot of the royal city, next to the tall red walls of the palace, a sedan chair walked slowly. Behind it followed a few attendants. The imperial guards at the palace gates saw the sedan chair walk around the palace walls, but no one came forward to question it. It was the Prime Minister's sedan chair. This was the Prime Minister's habit. Whenever the kingdom of Qing encountered a problem, he would always have his sedan chair carried around the palace walls. Some people said that he pondered in a strict and quiet environment. Those who despised the Prime Minister believed that this strange habit of his showed some kind of sick fanaticism for power. In the second year of the Qing calendar, there was a flood in the southern river. The Prime Minister sat in his sedan chair and circled the palace walls many times. The next day, he presented a memorial detailing the division of labor and procedures for disaster relief. It was clear and powerful, but the most crucial aspect of money was money. The Ministry of Revenue found it difficult to make ends meet. At this time, the palace treasury received a large sum of money from overseas trade, which provided protection for the Prime Minister's plans. His Majesty was very pleased. People often said that the Prime Minister was a treacherous man, one could tell just by looking at his manner. The Prime Minister was a capable man, one could tell just by looking at the world. But regardless of whether he was a treacherous man or a capable man, at certain times, he would always return to his most primal role, such as being a father. Today, the Prime Minister's sedan chair circled the palace walls. No one dared to disturb him, because everyone knew that his second son had died and he was in a bad mood. The night gradually deepened. Red candles and lanterns were lit in the palace. A faint yellow light spilled over the high walls, but this side of the palace walls was still pitch black. The sedan chair slowly walked to a secluded corner of the palace walls. In the distance, a lantern swayed as it approached. As it got closer, it became clear that it was also a sedan chair. Chapter 104. The two palanquins stopped at the same time. The bearers carefully put down their poles, and just like when Fan Xian and Chen Pingping met, they quietly retreated into the distance. The palanquins naturally leaned forward, so the people sitting inside should be uncomfortable. But strangely, neither the Prime Minister nor the person in the palanquin came out to greet them. So the palanquins bowed to each other, like two friends greeting each other, or like a couple bowing to heaven and earth before their wedding night. "Ruofu, don't be too sad." A soft and weak voice finally came from the opposite palanquin. It was the eldest princess coming out of the palace to see her lover from many years ago. Hearing this familiar voice, the Prime Minister frowned slightly, as if remembering something from many years ago. He said lightly, "I am very grateful that the eldest princess is concerned about my family matters." Hearing his distant words, the eldest princess's voice immediately became mournful. "This difference between master and subject, how can it be brought up between the two of us? Why are you speaking so coldly today?" A cold laugh came from the Prime Minister's palanquin. "Your Highness, Ruofu is incompetent, but I do not want to become a doe that you can knead as you wish." The other palanquin fell silent, as if not expecting such hurtful words. After a long while, she replied pitifully, "Ruofu, what do you mean? Although Gong-er is not my child, I always send people to send gifts to your residence during the festival. I love him as much as you do. I, as a dignified princess, am I your punching bag? Forget it, you are not in a good mood today, so let's not talk about it." Lin Ruofu suddenly snorted. "I have met with the eldest princess today to tell you that I have agreed to Chin'er's marriage in October." It was completely dark outside the palace walls. Only the lantern placed next to the eldest princess sedan gave off a bit of light. The long period of silence was enough to prove how shocked the seemingly weak woman in the sedan was right now, and how angry she was after hearing these words. After a long time, the eldest princess' clear voice that was like the cold winds of winter came through the sedan curtains. "That is my daughter. I will not let her marry that little bastard of the Fan family." Whether in or out of the palace, the eldest princess had always given people an image of weakness. Who knew that her words would be so harsh? "Can you persuade His Majesty?" Lin Ruofu's voice carried a trace of self-blame and self-pity. "Moreover, Your Majesty has let the world know that Chin'er is my daughter. This means that she is destined to be a dishonorable character." The eldest princess's voice immediately became extremely sad and beautiful. "You really have the heart to." Hearing her voice now, Lin Ruofu felt disgusted. He said with disgust, "If Princess is worried about the palace treasury, that is no longer within the scope of my consideration." Chang Gongfang said in a trembling voice, "If you don't consider it, who will? I am just a woman, living alone in the palace. Do you think it was easy for me all these years?" Inside the palanquin, Lin Ruofu's face was filled with loathing. "I have a daughter, but I can't see her all year round. I can only occasionally catch a glimpse of her from afar at the palace banquets. Do you think it's easy for a father like me?" The eldest princess miserably explained, "This is something that can't be helped. Back then, I was secretly pregnant, and I didn't have the heart to ruin your future, so I raised her alone. These years, I have helped you take care of things in the palace, and secretly transferred silver from the palace treasury for you to use. Don't tell me you don't think of my kindness." The voice in the Prime Minister's palanquin grew cold. Lin Ruofu growled in a low voice, "My future? Since then, when have I ever taken the initiative to ask for such a future? Back then, I was a poor scholar, but now I have become a Prime Minister. It seems to be glorious, but I can't see my daughter. I gave birth to a son but—" he said in a trembling voice in the palanquin, "but died tragically in front of me. This is not my future, what I want. This is only the power you want. You are not willing to marry a prince who will never be able to make a name for himself, and live the rest of your life in peace. Do you think I should thank you for this?" Hearing these words, the eldest princess was enraged. In a shrill voice, she cried and cursed, "Lin Ruofu, things have already reached this point, yet you still say such nonsense. If you really are not satisfied, why didn't you say anything when you were transferred to the Imperial Censorate to be the Imperial Censorate? Why didn't you feel sad when you were transferred to Hanlin Academy? Why didn't you blame yourself when I helped you get the position of Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Appointments? When you were promoted step by step, you didn't remember my kindness. Now that things are not going your way, you vent all your anger on me. Very well, Royer." Hearing the eldest princess's voice become louder and louder, Lin Ruofu's voice calmed down. His words were filled with resentment. "I would rather you be this kind of shrew than to always have that kind of sorrowful appearance. Do you know that that is very disgusting?" The eldest princess was so angry that she couldn't speak. "As for Chinner's marriage, I have decided. I have observed Fan Xian. No matter what kind of person he is, at least he is not someone who will die easily," Lin Ruofu said coldly. "I do not wish for my daughter to become a widow." The eldest princess rebuked him. "Have you lost your mind today? Gonger has just been murdered, and you are in such a hurry to win over the Fan family. Do you really believe what that old dog Chen Pingping said? Sigurjian is a man of high status. How could he come to the capital to kill people? Perhaps Fan Jian is the mastermind behind this." Lin Ruofu said coldly, "The one who died was my son. Do you think I did not go to see him for the last time? Those scars cannot be hidden. Sigurjian's sword will is sharp but casual. Even if I am mistaken, the one in my household will not." Seeing that she could not convince him, the eldest princess's tone softened. She pleaded, "Wait for me to investigate. Even if you do not pity me, do not let Chinner marry into the Fan family." After a moment of silence, Lin Ruofu finally spoke. "Wu Bowen suggested to me the plan to assassinate Fan Xian. I did not agree. I did not expect him to persuade the stupid Gonger." The eldest princess fell silent. She knew that it was difficult to convince him that she had nothing to do with this matter. "Wu Bowen is your man." Lin Ruofu's voice was so cold that it seemed to freeze the swaying curtains of the sedan chair in the night wind. "I always knew that he was one of your people, that he was someone you used to monitor me, but I never thought that my son would die because of you. So, let's stop here." The night wind began to blow around the palace walls. The palanquin slowly disappeared into the darkness. A lantern fell weakly to the side of a lonely palanquin. The faint sound of a woman weeping could be heard from the palanquin. The eunuchs nervously stepped forward, and the palace maids held up lanterns. The procession slowly entered the palace through the corner gate of the palace. The palanquin traveled for a long time before arriving at Guangxin Palace, where the eldest princess was temporarily staying. The curtain was lifted, and the eldest princess stepped out, her face streaked with tears. The eunuchs and palace maids quickly lowered their heads, not daring to look up. The eldest princess weakly walked up the stone steps. Finally, she wiped away the tears on her face. Suddenly, she smiled sweetly, like a willow tree that had just shed its dew. She timidly said, "Kill them all." Several streaks of green light appeared. The eunuchs did not have time to beg for mercy before their throats were slit by the eldest princess palace maids with knives hidden in their sleeves. Inside the palace, the corpses fell to the ground, making a few soft sounds. The Prime Minister's manor was not the largest residence in the capital, but it was the wealthiest. Neither King Jing nor the wealthy Marquis Tianling could compare to the Prime Minister's manor. The main entrance and decorations of the Prime Minister's manor did not appear to be very luxurious, but those who were truly knowledgeable could tell at a glance that the furnishings within the manor had already been stripped of their splendor, leaving behind only high-class playthings. Just a few chairs could probably be replaced by King Jing's large nursery. Of course, the comparison we're making here naturally excludes His Majesty's residence. His residence is called the Imperial Palace. Who would dare to compete with him there? Lin Ruofu was able to amass so much wealth in a short span of 20 years. Everyone knew that he was greedy and crafty, but His Majesty always turned a blind eye and pretended not to see it. This was a very confusing matter. Walking through the front hall, Lin Ruofu greeted the civil officials who had come to offer their condolences. His expression was somewhat dejected as he walked into the inner residence. The officials knew that the Prime Minister was in a low mood and did not want to disturb him, so they all took their leave. Only a few officials who had urgent business to attend to waited helplessly. Lin Ruofu seemed to think of them. He walked back and asked what had happened. He forced himself to finish dealing with the matters at hand, then waved his hand weakly to let them go. When these officials left the manor, they were filled with self-blame and indescribable admiration. The Prime Minister had encountered such a calamity, yet he was still able to put public affairs first. He was truly a rare pillar of the nation. Arriving at the inner residence and entering the study, Lin Ruofu sat at the table and did not say a word for a long time. "Sir, it does not seem appropriate to fall out with the Eastern Palace at this time." Yuan Hongdao, the closest friend of the Prime Minister and his most trusted advisor, brought him a cup of tea. Today, Yuan Hongdao was wearing plain clothes. Seeing Lin Ruofu forcing himself to stay awake, he couldn't help but feel gloomy. "Let's not talk about this for now," he said. "You should go and rest first." Lin Ruofu shook his head. His wrinkles were filled with deep worry. "Now that things have come to this," he said quietly. "For the sake of this manor and the people of the Lin clan, I have to make a plan." Chapter 105. Yuan Hongdao frowned. The Prime Minister said softly, "I've been in court for too long, and I don't know how many people I've offended. I have 2 sons and a daughter, and I had hoped that Gong would be successful. Who would have thought that he would suffer such a calamity? Now I only have Dabao and Chen Er. I have to make some arrangements for them." Yuan Hongdao frowned again. "But this change seems to be a little too drastic." Lin Ruofu's gaze suddenly softened. "As a father, there's no need to be so protective of your body. If we're talking about a fight for the throne, His Majesty is in the prime of his life. I'm afraid you and I will be long dead by then. There's no need to worry so much." He then asked, "Are you sure it was Siga Jian who did it?" Yuan Hongdao nodded. "Yes." Lin Ruofu took a deep breath. "Sometimes I find that the power in my hands can't be exchanged for anything, but since the Fan family and the Overwatch Council have been secretly working together for so many years, I think that if I were to be included, they wouldn't refuse." Yuan Hongdao smiled. Assistant Minister Fan, relying on his friendship with His Majesty, pushed for this marriage. "Presumably, you've been hoping for it for a long time." Lin Ruofu smiled. "In a few days, I want to see that Fan Xian with my own eyes. I want to see if he's worthy of my daughter." Yuan Hongdao then said, "What about the eldest princess?" He knew that the Prime Minister's second son's unnatural death was inextricably linked to the eldest princess's plan, so Yuan Hongdao very carefully mentioned her name. Li Yunrui had Wu Bo and prepare for the first assassination. It was a plan that killed 3 birds with 1 stone. By killing Fan Xian, she could regain control of the palace treasury. By persuading Gong, she could use this as a rope to bind the Prime Minister's manor tightly to her. But she didn't expect that Fan Xian wouldn't be so easy to kill, and that bastard Wu Bo and my son died. Lin Ruofu's eyes flashed coldly. But she still has the most important part. She calculated His Majesty's intentions. Even if Cheng Jiushu and his party could escape the capital, I'm afraid that she would have faked my orders and had Fang Xiu killed in Cangzhou, to prove that Northern Qi committed the murder. Yuan Hongdao frowned and said, so it turns out that young Master Chan guessed correctly that His Majesty wanted to start a war. Lin Ruofu shook his head. When His Majesty went on the northern expedition, he was not able to achieve full success and has always been brooding over it. Now that the eldest princess has given him such a good excuse, even if His Majesty does not like her taking matters into her own hands, he still has to accept her kindness. However, the matter of the peace treaty back then was too complicated. At most, Your Majesty will take a few small countries and give Northern Qi a taste of his power. Yuan Hongdao sighed, Princess Royal's intelligence is astonishing, it's really difficult to deal with her. Lin Ruofu slowly closed his eyes and said, I have never thought of dealing with her, leave it to the juniors. Yes, my lord. Just then, there was a commotion outside the study. No one knew who dared to make such a racket in the middle of the night, but judging from the expressions of the Prime Minister and Yuan Hongdao, they clearly knew who was outside. The door was pushed open, and a fat man in his 20s walked in. The old nannies and servants behind him did not stop him, and dared to stand outside the study and ask for forgiveness from the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister's manor had strict rules, and without the Prime Minister's permission, anyone who entered the study without permission would be severely punished. Lin Ruofu waved his hand to indicate that he understood, then looked at the fat man with a gentle expression and said quietly, Dabao, why are you not being good again? The fat man called Dabao had a very wide space between his eyebrows, and his eyes were somewhat blank. It looked like there was something wrong with his brain development. But hearing Lin Ruofu's words, he immediately quieted down and said shyly, Dabao is good, it's just that little brother hasn't come back yet. This was Lin Ruofu's eldest son. When he was young, he had an illness, and as a result, he became like this. He had always had the intelligence of a 3 or 4-year-old, so he rarely went out. The people of the capital sympathized with the Prime Minister's plight, and did not mention this matter. Dabao was usually the closest to Lin Gong, but he had not seen his little brother for the past 2 days, so he became irritated. Lin Ruofu's heart ached as if it was being twisted. He held his chest, and after a while, he gently said, Bao has gone out, and will be back in a few days. Dabao, be a good boy and go to sleep. Dabao finally calmed down, and with an awkward smile on his face, he was led to the back courtyard by the old nannies to sleep. After a moment of silence, Lin Ruofu said coldly, I only have a son and a daughter, and Dabao is like this. Brother Yuan, what do you think I should do? Yuan Hongdao frowned. If you think about the young master, it is not a good idea for Miss Chen to marry Fan Xian. After all, it seems that young Master Fan will not be able to escape political strife, and it will be difficult for him to live a stable life. In the future, it will not be convenient to entrust young Master Fan to Miss Chen. Lin Ruofu shook his head, and there was a chill in his voice. As long as his surname is Fan, he will not be able to escape. So I would rather he be a cruel and merciless person. That way, he can protect Chen, and her brother for the rest of their lives. Having said this, he immediately regained his composure. He walked behind the desk and pulled back the veil. Looking at the map of the world behind it, he began to frown in silence. His gaze occasionally swept in the direction of Dongyi, but most of it stopped at the north of the kingdom of Qing, and the complicated network of small vassal states between the kingdom of Qing and northern Qi. After a long time, Lin Ruofu frowned. We need to come up with a strategy immediately. Although it may not be a war, and the two sides may not come into direct contact, the northern prefectures need to transport food and horses to those small states. We must make preparations in advance. Yuan Hongdao made a sound of acknowledgement. Then he heard the Prime Minister begin to cough. The coughing was so urgent that it seemed as if tears were forming in the corners of his eyes. The Prime Minister stood in front of the map with his hands clasped behind his back. He frowned as if he had not lost a son that day. Yuan Hongdao looked at his back and sighed in his heart. He felt slightly moved and guilty. Ruofu had lived a rich and noble life, but he had never had a comfortable one. It could be said that one meeting with the princess had ruined his life. All of these things happened in one day. No one knew what these secret deals and quarrels meant. The meeting between Count Sinan and Chen Pingping, and the private meeting between the Prime Minister and the eldest princess, no more than 10 people in the court knew about these two matters. So Fan Xian did not know that his future had already been arranged for him to walk on a golden path. If the past few months after entering the capital had been like the darkness before dawn, with thick, viscous ink covering his face, he would feel pressured and unable to relax. But in the following days, it was as if God had suddenly brought a basin of clean water and splashed it on his face. It made him feel refreshed and at ease, and also made him extremely clear-headed. These days, he kept telling himself that his second brother-in-law's death had nothing to do with him. Only then could he face Lin Wanner, who was the most difficult person to face. Ever since Lin Wanner learned of her second brother's death, she had been in low spirits. Although they had only met a few times, they were connected by blood, and she was still sad. Fan Xian saw all of this and felt bad. Although his second brother-in-law was the mastermind behind his death, he sometimes felt that he was a bit cold-blooded and morbid. If he had heard back in Danzhou that Fan Xizha had died in the capital, perhaps he would not have felt the slightest bit of sadness. Of course, the situation now was different. Lady Lu seemed to have tacitly approved of the current situation, and the Lu family in the capital had also sensed that something was amiss. They had given Lady Lu enough information to refer to, so Lady Lu was unusually calm, and no longer prevented Fan Xizha from following Fan Xian around the capital. What made Fan Xian feel most at ease was that no one, including the Prime Minister, seemed to suspect that the death of the second son of the Prime Minister had anything to do with him. In fact, he and King Jing were overthinking this matter. That day, Wu Boan and Lin Gong had been hidden so well that even the Overwatch Council could not find them. Aside from the 4 grandmasters, who else could find them? As long as no one knew of Fan Xian's relationship with Wu Zhu, no one would suspect that Fan Xian had anything to do with Lin Gong's death. What was even more surprising to Fan Xian was that, after many messages, he received some vague information from the Prime Minister's manner. The Prime Minister had expressed some degree of approval for the October wedding. Just as Fan Xian was wondering if the old man had truly become disheartened at seeing his son die, the crafty Count Sinan, Fan Jian, understood the reason behind this before anyone else in the court. For some reason, the Prime Minister and the Eastern Palace or the eldest princess were at odds. This was Lin Ruofu looking for a new investment direction. Perhaps it was a sign that the Prime Minister's political focus had begun to shift towards the second prince. The 2 assassinations, one after the other, shook the skies of the capital like 2 bolts of spring thunder. But after the spring thunder, there was no rain, and the matter gradually faded. But the Prime Minister seemed to be grieving over the death of his son, and became somewhat disheartened. He rarely attended court, citing his illness. The cripple, Director Chen, also did not attend court much. He only stayed in the courtyard, occasionally issuing a few orders. Thinking of this, Fan Xian was puzzled. Why did Chen Pingping not summon him after returning to the capital? He still did not know that the cripple had been spying on him in the celestial prison. Even more puzzled was that Chen Pingping had clearly returned to the capital, so where had Fei Ti gone? In any case, after this short but bitter confrontation, the various powers in the imperial court paid the price of a few lives and rebuilt a somewhat fragile balance. Some people accepted changes that they had no choice but to accept, such as the change of control of the palace treasury in a few years. Others began to find another way to protect themselves and their families, such as the Prime Minister. These changes were undoubtedly extremely beneficial to Fan Xian. At least he did not have to worry too much about his personal safety. Only now did he write a letter to his grandmother, who was far away in Danzhou. He told her that he was doing very well in the capital, and asked her not to worry too much. After spring came summer. Although this was nonsense, for Fan Xian, who had finally found a foothold in Jingdou, there was finally less of the rain in his life and more of the bright, sunny days. Happy days seemed to be slowly waving at him from the other side. Summer had come. Could the autumn wedding be far behind? Chapter 106. The imperial edict had already been sent to Dongyi, but Dongyi had only humbly and flatteringly replied to the edict, offering a large sum of gold and silver. They refused to admit that they had anything to do with the manor at the foot of Tsang Mountain. This was a response anyone could imagine. The great grandmaster who guarded Dongyi's sword lodge alone maintained his pride. At the same time, he did not want to bring disaster to the millions of people surrounding Dongyi, so he could only remain silent. The situation in the north was tense. The evidence of northern Qi's meddling in the internal affairs of the Qin kingdom was a fact that they could not defend themselves. So the two sides trained their troops on the border, and small conflicts broke out between the small vassal states that each side controlled. It seemed that a war was about to break out. Dark clouds floated in the north of the Qin kingdom, but it was midsummer in the capital. People wandered about freely, enjoying the peace and prosperity that came with a flourishing age. Fan Xian was also one of them. Although the incident at Nyolan Street had not ended with his own hands, it could be considered as an explanation to himself and those who had died. And in the process of handling this matter, he learned many things. Although every step he took was actually relying on the power of the Overwatch Council, he learned a lot about the Overwatch Council's procedures. Other than what Fei Jia had taught him all those years ago, he learned a lot more about the Overwatch Council's procedures. The summer was hard to endure. The lawsuit between the Fan family and the Guo family had finally come to an end. In the eyes of many, this was already a small matter. Since Fan Xian had become the functionary of Taichung Temple, he would naturally become a noble of some princess in the palace. The insignificant Guo family, facing the palace, did not dare to meddle. So they had long since withdrawn the lawsuit, and Fan Xian had finally obtained permission to leave the capital. After such a terrible event, Fan Xian dared to immediately leave the capital. It had to be said that it was a very bold move. But now, there were always many people following him to protect him. There were old people from the Fan Manor, and there were people from the Overwatch Council. Now, Fan Xian had a secret identity, commissioner of the Overwatch Council. Other than Wang Qinian, he had also recruited a few new faces from all over the place. One morning, before the scorching sun rose, the three young masters of the Fan Manor climbed into a carriage. Under the protection of the guards and Wang Qinian's squad, they drove out of the capital and arrived at the Fan Manor not far from the capital. This trip was not to avoid the heat, but to offer sacrifices. In the cemetery, the guards had already laid out the offerings such as fruits, incense, candles, and the like. Fan Xian silently looked at the few new gravestones, and his heart was filled with complicated feelings. Ever since his rebirth, he had been holding on to his thoughts, but at this moment, he became somewhat absent-minded. The smoke from the burning paper money was very heavy, and Fan Xija could not stand it anymore. He retreated to the carriage, but Ruoruo endured the smoke. She squinted her eyes and held her brother's sleeve as she stood in front of the grave. She knew that the three guards who were laid to rest here had died for her brother's sake, so her heart was filled with gratitude. Furthermore, she had been taught about this in Fan Xian's letters since she was a child, so she did not think that paying respects to servants was against the rules. In the smoke, a few new guards stood silently behind Fan Xian. Whether it was because of the smoke or the fire, the men's eyes were slightly red. The way they looked at their young master's back was different. After a while, one of the guards kindly advised, "Young master, you've come to see these brothers. It's good enough that you've come to see them. There's a lot of smoke here, so let's go back to the manor." Fan Xian's eyes were also badly stained by the smoke. He smiled and rubbed them. He listened to the guard and got into the carriage. In the carriage, Fan Xija was looking at the accounts of Danbo bookstore for the past month. Seeing his brother and sister enter, he shifted his seat and suddenly lowered his voice. "Big brother, is this a trick to buy people's hearts?" Fan Xian's mood was somewhat gloomy. He smiled and ignored him. He used his hand to ruffle the hair on Fan Xija's big head. "You have to believe that there are some things in this world that are true. A heartless man may not necessarily be a true hero." Fan Ruoruo softly said, "How can a man not love his son?" Fan Xian looked at his sister with some surprise. "You?" Ruoruo lowered her head and explained, "Brother said it once a few days ago, so I remembered it." Fan Xija was very happy to find that his sister was so thoughtful and intelligent. "Remember," he said softly, "this was said by a man named Zhou." Fan Xija looked at him and muttered, "Oh, you've changed your pen name again? When are you going to bring out the last dozen or so chapters of Story of the Stone?" Fan Xian didn't have the energy to do that, but hearing the word pen name made him feel unreasonably embarrassed. He thought to himself that explaining who wrote it was indeed a bit redundant. He was slightly angry and embarrassed, so he continued to lecture Fan Xija. "Perhaps people's hearts can be bought, but things like feelings are formed naturally. If people don't have feelings, then wouldn't they become monsters? Living in this world, not caring about anything, not recognizing family, not caring about life and death. Even if you become an immortal, what's the point?" Fan Xija shook his head and retorted, "You're not an immortal." "How do you know if being an immortal is good or not?" Fan Xian responded quickly. "I'm not an immortal. I'm a human, so I know that being an immortal and not being able to live forever must feel terrible." Suddenly, Fan Xian thought of Uncle Wu Zhu, and a strong feeling of unease and self-blame welled up in his heart. He was worried that when Uncle Wu Zhu grew old, he would become a lonely old man who couldn't speak, but Wu Zhu insisted on hiding in the dark, and Fan Xian had no way of finding him. The carriage left the clan's graveyard and followed the widest ridge between the fields, making its way to the estate with some difficulty. When the carriage arrived at the foot of a large slope on the outskirts of the estate, the people of the estate came out to greet them. It wasn't just tenant farmers who lived there, but also a few destitute families of the Fan clan. They couldn't stay in such a prosperous and expensive place like the capital, so they had to move to the nearby farms. But they didn't have land, and they couldn't bring themselves to pay rent like the tenant farmers. Count Sinan wasn't someone who was willing to spend money to take care of his poor relatives, but he couldn't just watch them starve to death. So for now, these Fan clansmen only helped the Fan manor look after the farms and took care of the affairs here, so that they could earn some money each month to support their families. Strangely, Count Sinan never mentioned Fan Xian's ancestral homecoming, and Fan Xian pretended to have forgotten. He still had some questions that he couldn't explain. However, in the capital today, there was no longer anyone who looked down on Fan Xian as an illegitimate child. In the Fan clan, they knew that the future of the Fan clan would probably depend on this beautiful young master, so they were especially respectful. Fan Xian took the cup of tea handed to him by the elder and drank it in one gulp. He nodded to the people around him, then followed the guard to a small courtyard on the west side of the forest. This was Teng Zijing's courtyard. Once inside, Fan Xian found that Teng Zijing had already gotten up and was waiting obediently in the courtyard. Teng Zijing looked at Fan Xian and said awkwardly, "Young master, I wanted to go out to greet you, but Ho San wouldn't let me." Fan Xian didn't stand on ceremony with him. He helped him into the central room and explained, "Don't blame Ho-san, I said that." Ho-san, was one of Fan Xian's newly recruited guards. He had been at the front of the country estate. Fan Xian looked at Teng Zijing's slightly stout face and asked, "How's your leg?" Teng Zijing laughed. "It's nothing. I can move it now. I'll probably be able to return to the capital in a few days. If you think it's not easy to recover here, you might as well go back to the capital." As they spoke, Teng Zijing's wife and daughter came in to greet their master. Fan Ruoruo handed out the money and asked Teng Zijing's 5-year-old daughter a few questions. She then carried the child out, leaving the men in the room. Fan Xizha was still calculating, and even Teng Zijing's greeting was only a grunt of acknowledgement. Fan Xian looked at his brother helplessly and listened to Teng Zijing's explanation. He'll stay in the manor for now. After all, his wife and son are here. Once he's recovered, he'll naturally return to the capital to serve the young master. The two of them could be considered to have experienced life and death together, so their conversation was much more direct. Fan Xian nodded and praised him. "You sure know how to enjoy your wife and child heating the Kong." Teng Zijing laughed. "It's so hot today. If the Kong gets any hotter, you'll suffer from internal heat." Danzhou's climate was excellent. It was warm in the winter and cool in the summer, so no one used Kong beds. After entering the capital, it happened to be spring and summer, so Fan Xian didn't have the opportunity to sleep on the large Kong. Hearing this, he pressed down on the Kong he was sitting on and found that it was cool and comfortable. His eyes turned, and he thought that if he were to live in the middle of the Tsang Mountains for a while after his marriage, he would have to find a way to make a Kong bed. Teng Zijing had no idea that the young master's mind had suddenly wandered to the winter snow mountains after October. "Young master, eat some fruit and then return to the manor. There's nothing good to eat in this manor. Besides, if we delay any longer, it will be too late to get back to the capital. I'm afraid we won't be able to get through the city gates." Fan Xian smiled and waved his hand. "Before we came, I told my father that the three of us will stay the night in this manor and return tomorrow. We've been working hard in the capital for the past few months, and it's rare that we have a chance to have some peace and quiet. Although we don't dare to stay too long, you should at least entertain us for one night." Only now did Teng Zijing know that he was planning to spend the night. He quickly called his wife in and had her prepare guest rooms, hot water, and the like. Although life in the manor was not luxurious, there were many people. As soon as they heard that the young master of Fan Manor was going to spend the night there, a dozen middle-aged wives began to make arrangements. Before long, everything was ready. Fan Xian rolled his eyes and moved closer to Teng Zijing's ear. "Arrange for the people following me to stay somewhere close." Chapter 107. Teng Zijing glanced at Wang Qinian, who had been standing quietly behind Fan Xian. Sensing that his scent was different from that of the guards in the manor, he responded in a low voice. Fan Xian looked into his eyes and said in a low voice, "This is Wang Qinian. I have a part-time position in the Overwatch Council. Don't tell anyone else." Teng Zijing's expression froze, and the way he looked at Fan Xian changed. After all, he did not think that the young master he had once wanted to follow would be able to sneak into the forbidden courtyard within a few months of entering the capital. Fan Xian called Wang Qinian over and introduced him. "This is Teng Zijing, the one I mentioned when we met for the second time. You two should get to know each other better. He saved my life before." Hearing this, Teng Zijing's dark face turned red. He waved his hands. "Young master, you speak too seriously. Actually, it was you who saved my life that day." Wang Qinian put his hands together and smiled. He said nothing. Like Teng Zijing, he was very satisfied with the current situation. Not only had he successfully returned to the Overwatch Council, but his monthly salary had also increased considerably. The director had even personally received him once. Ever since he had become a civil servant many years ago, it had been a long time since he had received such treatment. Although Master Fan was only an 8th-level functionary of Taichung Temple, he had a commissioner's token on him. Apart from his own team, only the head of the Overwatch Council and Mu Tai knew about this commissioner. No one else knew. This kind of mysterious power in his hands made him feel very comfortable. They had wild game for dinner. Although Teng Zijing had repeatedly said that there was nothing good to eat in the country estate, the fatty meat boiling in the pot, coupled with the tender green vegetables, was incredibly delicious. Even Fan Xija's appetite was whetted, and he snatched the meat as if there was no one else around. Fan Xian looked at him, amused. He picked up a piece of meat and brought it to his lips. He found that the meat was very tender, but the layers of skin were clear, and it was very chewy. He couldn't help but praise it. "Is this moose, or what?" Teng Zijing's wife, who was standing to one side, hurriedly replied, "This is white moose meat." Hearing the words, by Mozi, Fan Xian froze. He placed his chopsticks in front of him as if he had forgotten to move. In this instant, he thought of a time many years ago, even longer than Danzhou. At the time, he was lying in bed, constantly thinking of eating white elk meat, and the pretty nurse teased him about his wild imagination. In his previous life, Fan Shen had never eaten white elk meat, only that it was the favorite game of his hometown. These memories seemed to have faded, and it had been a long time since Fan Xian had thought of the events of his previous life. Unexpectedly, the white elk meat today had stirred up the emotions he had hidden for a long time. Fan Ruoruo took small bites from the side. Seeing that her brother's expression seemed a little strange, she carefully asked, "What's wrong?" Fan Xian immediately woke up and smiled slightly. "Nothing." He turned his head to ask Teng Zijing if any of the mountain products had been preserved. After receiving a positive answer, he happily asked Teng Zijing to help him pack up a few dozen caddies of meat to take back to the capital. Teng Zijing had not expected that the things he had prepared today would be to the young master's liking, and was very happy. Fan Xian picked up his wine cup and drank with the others at the table. "Teng Zijing," he said with a smile, "you haven't fully recovered yet. You should drink less." Next to him, Fan Ruoruo looked at her brother and smiled, as if to embarrass him. Fan Xian knew that his sister had guessed what he was thinking. Apart from wanting to eat it himself, the main purpose of bringing the preserved game back to the capital was for the gluttonous Wanner to enjoy. After dinner, Fan Xija, in an extremely perverted manner, went back to his room to calculate the accounts. Fan Xian really didn't know what fun there was in calculating accounts, and how could a 12 or 13-year-old bully be able to revel in boring numbers? He could only sigh and let him be. Refusing Teng Zijing's request to accompany him on his crutch, he led Fan Ruoruo to the edge of the field outside the courtyard. They looked at the round moon that seemed to be floating quietly among the green hills. Above their heads, the unknown trees rustled in the night wind. It was a very beautiful scene. The dream is still in front of the body, I suspect it is in the dream. How many people are haggard, how many people return? Fan Xian thought of the events of his previous life, and occasionally sighed with emotion. He casually recited 2 sentences. Time is a passerby for 100 generations. Heaven and earth, the journey of all things. Life is a great dream. Sometimes I wonder if I am still lying on that bed, dreaming a dream that has lasted so long that I have yet to wake up. He casually sighed, knowing that his sister probably didn't understand what he was saying. But he had forgotten the elegance hidden in Master Li Bai's words, and how lethal they were to a young girl. As expected, Fan Ruoruo's eyes began to shine. Fan Xian immediately knew that he had made a mistake. With a distressed expression, he prepared to explain that other than the first 2 sentences, the rest had been written by a great man named Li Bai. But then he suddenly remembered that Xia had mocked him earlier in the day. He secretly sighed and stopped what others might think was a pretentious action, but to him it seemed very natural. He also knew that even if he said it, his sister wouldn't believe him. After all, the Overwatch Council had arrested a number of Xian Kijis, but none of them were salt smugglers who knew how to write poetry. So he simply pulled Ruoruo into his arms and looked at the moon together. Although Fan Xian had lived in this world for more than 10 years, he still retained some of his unique temperament. This temperament did not match with this world, but for him, it had great benefits. For example, the precaution between men and women, and for example, physical contact. When he held his sister, of course, there was not the slightest thought of a man and a woman, only a very pure brotherly love. On the contrary, when Fan Ruoruo was held in his arms, she felt warm and slightly shy, and naturally forgot to ask about those things. In the distance, 2 members of the Overwatch Council stood under another tree like 2 iron rods, protecting their safety. Get up early tomorrow. I have business in the city. Fan Xian sniffed his sister's hair, and found it to be a faint orchid scent. He asked curiously, "What method did you use?" Fan Ruoruo was slightly embarrassed. She didn't know what to say to her brother. "It's pear blossom water. Why are you in such a hurry?" In this world, girls rarely washed their hair, so the smell was not very good. Even when Fan Xian and Sea Lily rolled around in the same bed, it was the same. It was all covered up by the strong fragrance. Ever since Fan Xian had entered the capital, he had shamelessly asked Fan Ruoruo and Lin Wan, to wash their hair often. He even gave them the shower head and wooden bucket design he had made in Danzhou for free. Ruoruo and Wan, couldn't dissuade him, so they did as he asked. They didn't expect the effect to be so obvious. It immediately spread throughout Fan Manor and the royal courtyard. Now even Lady Lu washed her hair more frequently. Father should be very happy. This was Fan Xian's unspoken reply. He then replied to Ruoruo, "The capital is quieter in the morning. I have a place to go. You come with me, and the others don't need to follow." Knowing that her brother trusted her, Fan Ruoruo was very moved. Fan Xian then said, "Tomorrow I have to go to Qingyu Hall to take a look. Shopkeeper Yi and I have discussed it. The capital has been relatively quiet lately, so it's a good time to go and see." The shopkeeper of Qingyu Hall lived up to his reputation. Fan Xia was in charge of planning the accounts, and shopkeeper Yi was in charge of implementing them. Danbo Bookstore's business was doing better and better. Relying on his family's wealth and his official background, he had managed to take over all of the other booksellers on the neighboring streets within 2 months. Recently, he had slowly extended his reach to the neighboring counties. "Is the tofu shop still open?" Fan Ruoruo suddenly thought of a small matter. "The Crown Prince is interested in the soy milk you bring to the manor every day. He's afraid that he won't be able to drink it someday." "Doesn't he always tell you to open it?" Fan Xian smiled. "I'm about to become a man who earns hundreds of thousands of silver a day. Why would I care about that tofu?" Of course, this was just a naughty joke. He continued, "Whenever you have time, you can do it. You don't have anything to do right now anyway, so you can find something to do." In his mind, there was no such thing as a young lady not being able to show her face in public, much less take care of a tofu shop. He just felt that if Ruoruo read and wrote poetry every day, she wouldn't become stupid. Fan Ruoruo was a little embarrassed, but she still agreed. Fan Xian thought of something important and frowned. Holding his sister's shoulders with both hands, he said seriously, "Ruoruo, although it seems to me that you're only 15 or 16 years old, and it's still too early for you to get married. But the atmosphere in the capital really isn't good. Even a young man like me is being forced to marry. you have to be careful. If you want to pick someone you like he's own way, who comes to the manor every day. I kicked him out with 3 strokes of the broom. But what if I get married to a good-for-nothing? He said very seriously, if you're going to marry, then you have to pick someone yourself. If you're going to marry someone you like, then you have to make your move early, before the marriage is set. Setting up a marriage is too risky. After all, not everyone in this world is as lucky as me and Juan are. If it's an order from my parents, I have enough confidence that I can handle it. But what if it's an edict from the palace? Given the position of the Fan family, we have to guard against this. Hearing her brother's words, Fan Ruoruo first felt a bit embarrassed. When she heard him boast about himself, she felt it was funny. It was only when she heard the words, palace, that she truly felt a bit worried. How could she not know that in an official's family, at her age, they would indeed be engaged? It was just that, spending every day with her brother, looking at the men of the world made her feel bored. How could she find the one she liked? You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.